Greetings, fellow fans. You're tuned into Super Harry, presenting to you today, What If Goblin Inheritance Test at age 8 found 52 memory charms and Harry true Emperor of Britain. Show some love by liking and subscribing. Enjoy the story ahead. Chapter 1, The Weight of 52. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Not the Hogwarts kind. Harry was only 8, still 3 years away from that particular piece of mail, but a crisp, cream-colored envelope sealed with a crest that showed a set of scales over crossed pickaxes, stamped in bronze wax. It had been delivered not by Owl but by a small, grey-uniformed goblin who knocked 3 sharp times on the door of number 4, Privet Drive, handed the envelope to a visibly horrified Petunia Desley, and left without a single word. Petunia had stared at it for a long time before she realized Harry was watching her from the kitchen doorway. "Get back to your chores," she said, and her voice had that particular thinness to it, like old paper stretched too tight. But her hands were shaking. Harry noticed. Harry always noticed things. It was, he had come to understand, one of the few advantages of being invisible in a house full of people who preferred he stay that way. When nobody looked at you directly, you got very good at watching everyone else. He had been doing it for as long as he could remember, cataloging expressions, reading tensions, filing away the small moments that didn't quite add up. The way Uncle Vernon went quiet instead of loud when something truly frightened him. The way Dudley stopped eating when he was actually upset, not just bored. The way Petunia sometimes stood at the kitchen window and looked out at absolutely nothing with an expression that was half guilt and half something older and harder to name. And the way she looked at this letter, like it was a stone thrown through a window she had spent years boarding up. She put it on the counter. She made breakfast. She did not give it to Harry. He took it while she was setting Dudley's plate down, slipping it from beneath the fruit bowl with the casual ease of someone who had been pilfering extra bread from the kitchen since he was 5. He was back at the table with it tucked under his thigh before she turned around, and if his heart was hammering, his face showed nothing at all. He read it in the cupboard under the stairs that night, by the thin strip of light that crept in under the door. Dear Mr. H. J. Potter, Gringotts Bank cordially requests your presence for your inheritance assessment, as is your right upon reaching your 8th year. This assessment is standard for all individuals of notable wizarding lineage. Please present yourself at Gringotts, Diagon Alley, London, on Saturday the 31st of July, between the hours of 9 and 11 in the morning. Bring this letter. The assessment is mandatory under the Goblin Wizard Accords of 1752. Non-attendance results in a default ruling that may not be reversed. Senior Assessor Ragnarok will oversee your appointment personally. Gringotts Bank Estate 1474. Harry read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it inside the pillowcase where he kept the small collection of things that were his and only his. A smooth black stone he'd found in the school garden, a rubber band, a photograph of a woman with dark red hair that he'd found in a cracked picture frame in the bin out back and quietly rescued. He lay back on his thin mattress in the dark and stared at the underside of the stairs. Senior Assessor Ragnarok will oversee your appointment personally. He didn't know much about goblins. What he knew about the wizarding world in general was patchy and secondhand. Overheard arguments between Petunia and Vernon, the odd whispered phone call, the things that happened around him sometimes that nobody would explain. Lights flickering when he was angry. A teacher's toupee ending up on the roof. A glass tank in a zoo emptying itself of its snake while he stood in front of it on Dudley's birthday. But he knew enough to understand that if a senior someone was personally overseeing an 8-year-old's appointment, that was not routine. He wondered what they thought they'd find. He fell asleep wondering. And on Saturday, he went to find out. Getting to Diagon Alley on his own should have been impossible. It was, in fact, only moderately difficult. Petunia had gone a careful shade of white when Harry set the letter on the breakfast table Saturday morning. Vernon had gone red, which was his default for all strong emotions. Dudley had kept eating his sausages with the focused contentment of someone whose inner life was genuinely uncomplicated. You're not going, Vernon said. It says it's mandatory, Harry said. And that not going results in a ruling that can't be reversed. He paused. I don't know what that means, but it sounds like it could affect you too. It was a guess, but it was a good one. He watched Vernon's face do several things in quick succession. Anger, then calculation, then something closer to fear. Petunia's hand tightened on her teacup. Fine, Vernon said, in the tone of a man who had decided this wasn't worth the trouble it would take to argue. I'll take you to the leaky cauldron. You go in, you come out. You do not talk to anyone you don't have to. You do not do anything, that will embarrass this family. Harry thought about pointing out that he had never embarrassed them in any deliberate way, but he let it go. Victories came in different shapes. Vernon dropped him at the entrance to the leaky cauldron on Charing Cross Road, stayed in the car, and drove away the moment Harry pushed through the door. Harry didn't look back. The leaky cauldron was dim and smelled of old wood and spilled ale and something faintly magical underneath it all, like the air before a thunderstorm. The barman, a friendly-looking man with no hair and a great many teeth, glanced at Harry with a startled expression that quickly resolved into something complicated and reverent. "Oh," the barman said. "Oh my. Are you Harry Potter?" "Yes," Harry said. "Can you tell me how to get to Diagon Alley, please?" There was a small commotion. Several people in the pub stood up. Someone spilled their drink. Harry stood in the middle of it with his hands in his pockets and waited it out with the patient stillness of someone who had learned very early that if you didn't react to chaos, it often resolved itself. A minute later, the barman, Tom, he said, "Call me Tom," was tapping bricks in the back wall with his wand, and Harry was walking out into the noise and color of Diagon Alley for the first time. He stopped in the archway and took it in. It was the most overwhelming place he had ever been, and he had been to a city center Tesco during the Christmas rush. The alley was long and crooked, crammed with shops selling things that moved and glowed and occasionally shouted. Owls sat in cages outside one shop. A cauldron in a window slowly poured itself. A woman argued with a hat that argued back. Children ran with their parents, pointing at things, and a wizard in bright purple robes walked past reading a newspaper whose photographs were waving at him. Harry stood in the middle of it and felt something happen in his chest. Something that was not quite sadness and not quite longing but was close to both, the feeling of looking at a place that should have been familiar and finding it completely new. He walked to Gringotts. The bank was white marble and intimidating by design. The goblins at the door inclined their heads slightly as Harry approached, which struck him as unusual enough to note. Inside, the vast hall echoed with the sound of quills on parchment and the clink of coins and the steady, serious business of an institution that had been operating longer than most governments currently in existence. Harry approached the nearest teller. "Harry Potter," he said. "I have an appointment with Senior Assessor Ragnarok." The goblin teller, who had been writing something with great concentration, stopped writing. Looked up. His amber eyes moved over Harry with an expression of intense assessment that reminded Harry, oddly, of the way certain teachers looked at maths prodigies who handed in work that was either brilliant or completely fabricated. "One moment," the goblin said, and disappeared through a door behind the counter. Harry waited. He was back in 90 seconds with a second goblin, this one older, with the kind of face that had been weathering things for so long it had simply decided not to change anymore. He was short even by goblin standards, dressed in deep charcoal robes with small bronze fastenings, and he moved with the specific careful precision of someone who had learned long ago that deliberate movement communicated authority better than speed. "Mr. Potter," the older goblin said. "I am Ragnarok. Come." Harry followed him through the door, down a corridor that sloped gently downward, past offices with closed doors and the occasional sound of heated argument or, once, something that might have been singing, and finally into a room that was larger than he'd expected, round, walled in dark stone, with a single heavy table at its center and a set of instruments on a side table that Harry couldn't identify but which gave off a faint, steady hum. There were two other goblins in the room. Both were older. Both looked at Harry with expressions he could not read. "Sit," Ragnarok said, indicating a chair across the table. He took the chair opposite. The other two goblins positioned themselves to either side without being told, in the manner of people following a procedure they had done many times. "This is an inheritance assessment," Ragnak said. "It is your legal right. The process is as follows: you will place your hand on the stone. The stone will read your bloodline, your magical inheritance, and the state of your magical core. It will produce a result on parchment. We will review the parchment together. Do you have questions before we begin?" "What's the stone?" Harry asked. Ragnak gestured to the side table. The centerpiece of the instrument array was a flat-topped piece of dark gray stone, roughly the size of a dinner plate, with a faint tracery of lines across its surface that might have been cracks or might have been intentional carving. It was hard to tell. "It is a piece of truth," Ragnak said simply. "It does not lie and it cannot be fooled. Place your right hand on it when I tell you." Harry looked at it. "All right. The assessment will take several minutes. You may feel warmth, or a sensation of pulling. This is normal. Do not remove your hand until I tell you." Harry nodded. "Then we will begin." Ragnak set a piece of blank parchment on the table in front of him and uncapped a quill that had no inkwell. "Place your hand on the stone, Mr. Potter." Harry leaned forward and pressed his right hand flat against the surface. It was warm immediately. Not uncomfortably so, like holding a mug of tea that had been sitting for 10 minutes. The tracery of lines on the surface began to glow, very faintly, amber at first and then brightening to a deep, steady gold. Harry felt the pulling sensation Ragnak had described, not physically, not quite, but somewhere underneath physical sensation, as if something in him was being slowly read like a page being turned. The quill began to move on the parchment without anyone touching it. Harry watched Ragnak's face. This, he reflected later, was how he knew something was wrong before anything visibly went wrong. Ragnak's face, for the first 30 seconds, was the face of a goblin conducting a routine assessment. Professional, present, mildly attentive. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not alarm. Goblins, Harry would later learn, did not do alarm the way humans did. But the quality of his attention changed. Sharpened. He leaned forward incrementally. His hand, resting on the table, went very still. The quill was moving faster now. One of the other goblins made a sound, not quite a word, just a short exhalation, and Ragnak turned and said something in gobbledygook that was short and precise. The second goblin left the room quickly, without running, though the speed suggested running had been considered. The stone under Harry's hand pulsed. The gold light deepened to something closer to white. Harry felt something shift inside him, not painfully, but with a sensation like a key turning in a lock he hadn't known was there. Then another. Then another. Each one distinct, each one carrying with it a faint impression, like a smell triggering a memory, flashes too quick to catch, a woman's laugh, a man's voice reading something, a room with high windows and stone walls, something about a sword. He kept his hand on the stone. He didn't remove it. The quill stopped. Ragnak looked at the parchment for a very long time. Then he looked up at Harry. "Mr. Potter," he said, and there was something different in his voice now, not reverence, exactly. Ragnak did not strike Harry as someone much given to reverence. It was more like the way a geologist might sound when the rock sample they'd sent off for routine testing came back as something rare enough to rewrite a textbook. "Remove your hand from the stone." Harry did. Ragnak placed the parchment on the table, flat, and turned it so Harry could see it, though Harry suspected Ragnak already knew he couldn't read whatever it said. "I will explain what this says," Ragnak said. "I will ask you to be patient and to listen completely before you respond. Can you do this?" "Yes," Harry said. Ragnak looked at him steadily for a moment. "Good," he said, and something in that single word suggested he'd been preparing for the possibility of a very different answer. "Then I will begin with the straightforward parts." He pointed to the top section of the parchment, where the script was densest. "Your magical core is exceptional. Not merely strong, the stone classifies it as sovereign grade, which is a category we have not recorded in this bank in 131 years. This means nothing in terms of what you can currently do, because your training is non-existent. But it is the ceiling you can reach. And that ceiling is, he paused, appearing to select his next word with care, considerable. Harry filed that away. He didn't say anything. Your bloodline is complex. You are, as known, the last of the Potter line, an ancient and noble house with significant standing, multiple Waisengamot seats, and a vault holding that is currently, he checked a different section of the parchment, rather larger than you have been led to believe, since no one has been managing it on your behalf and the interest has been compounding for 7 years. How large? Harry asked. Ragnarok named a number. Harry stared at him. The Potter line, Ragnarok continued, as if he had not just said something that made the inside of Harry's head go briefly white, connects through the maternal line to 3 other ancient houses, Peveril, which is the oldest wizarding family in British magical history, Gryffindor, being one of the 4 founders of Hogwarts School, and, through a succession of marriages and inheritance laws that I will spare you for the moment, the Imperial line of Emrys. The room was very quiet. Emrys, Harry said. He knew that name. It arrived in his chest with a weight that was disproportionate to its 2 syllables, like recognizing a word in a language you'd been told you'd never learn. The Imperial Compact of 832, Ragnarok said. Signed between Merlin, who bore the name Emrys, and the first organized body of the wizarding community in Britain. The compact established the position of Emperor of Magical Britain, not a ceremonial title. A functional one. Magical law, succession, and authority. The compact specified that the title passes through blood and magical confirmation only. It cannot be appointed. It cannot be stolen. It cannot be abdicated without a formal magical release, which has never been performed. He paused. The last confirmed holder of the title died in 1843. It has been in abeyance since then, with the Ministry of Magic operating under provisional authority, a provisional authority that, technically, has been awaiting the emergence of the rightful line for 183 years. Harry said nothing for a moment. Outside the room, somewhere in the depths of the bank, something mechanical clanked and echoed. That's me, Harry said. The stone confirms it. Your bloodline is a direct and unbroken succession. The magical compact recognizes you. The confirmation is absolute. Ragnarok folded his hands on the table. You are, under laws that predate the ministry, predate the Waisengamot as it currently exists, and predate every political structure currently operating in magical Britain, the Emperor. Harry looked at the table. He was 8 years old. He slept in a cupboard. His cousin had broken 3 of his pencils last week and nobody had done anything about it. He almost laughed. He didn't, he had a feeling laughing would be the wrong response in this room, with these goblins, at this particular moment, but he felt it as a pressure in the back of his throat. You said straightforward parts, he said. What are the other parts? Ragnarok's expression shifted. Not heavily, it was more like the surface of still water registering a stone dropped at its far edge. The stone detected, he said carefully, obstructions to your magical core and memory. Specifically, it detected the residue of 52 memory charms. The number landed in the room like something physical. Even the 2 goblin assistants, who had been still and professional through everything, were very carefully not looking at each other. 52, Harry said. 52. Cast over a period of approximately 6 years, beginning when you were approximately 20 months old. The earliest ones are the deepest. It is difficult to read what they removed specifically, because that is the nature of the charm. But the stone can identify what categories of memory were affected. Ragnarok met Harry's eyes. Your parents' deaths as you experienced them. Your understanding of your own magical nature and abilities. Your knowledge of your own lineage. Your memory of the Imperial Compact. And, another pause, this one smaller but harder, something the stone is classifying as a soul bond memory. We are not certain what that refers to. It may be significant or it may be incidental. Harry was quiet for a long time. The anger was there. It would have been strange if it wasn't. But it was arriving in a form he hadn't expected, not hot, not explosive. More like stepping outside on a cold morning and feeling the temperature resolve all around you, clarifying everything it touched. He felt it make his thinking sharper. Cleaner. Who cast them? He asked. The stone cannot identify the caster directly. But it can identify the signature of the magic. Ragnar's voice remained carefully neutral. The signature is consistent across all 52 charms. One caster. The magical signature is powerful, distinctive, and recorded in our files. He held Harry's gaze. It belongs to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore. Harry said nothing. He is, among other things, Ragnar continued, currently your magical guardian, a position he assigned to himself, which is technically legal under existing wizarding law, though the legality becomes considerably more complicated when you account for the Imperial Compact, under which the Emperor cannot be held under the guardianship of any individual without the Emperor's own consent. So he made himself my guardian, Harry said, and then removed my memory of being the Emperor, so that I would never know I could refuse his guardianship. That is one reading of the evidence. Do you have a different reading? Ragnar was quiet for a moment. No, he said, with the particular honesty of someone who had decided that a situation this extreme warranted it. I do not. Harry leaned back in his chair. He was aware that he should be more frightened. Or more devastated. Or something that would look more comprehensible from the outside, some reaction that mapped neatly onto what an 8-year-old should feel when told that the most powerful wizard in the world had spent 6 years systematically erasing his memories and hiding his identity. He was aware that his chest felt strange and his hands were not quite steady and that at some point in the last 10 minutes he had stopped breathing normally and switched to something more deliberate. But the dominant feeling, underneath everything else, was something almost like relief. The world had been lying to him. He'd always known. And here, finally, was the proof. Can they be removed? He asked. The memory charms. They can be reversed, with care and skill. It would require a specialist. We have one, here at Gringotts, a curse breaker named Griphook who has experience with layered charm removal. It would take multiple sessions and it would be, the experience is, by accounts, unpleasant. Unpleasant how? The memories return all at once. They do not return gently. Harry nodded. He looked at the parchment on the table. Can I keep this? It is yours. It is a record of your assessment and it is your legal property. Ragnar slid it across the table. There is, however, the question of what happens next. Yes, Harry said. I was about to ask that. Ragnar leaned forward slightly. What happens next is, in its broadest form, your choice. We can do nothing. We can report the results through official channels, which means the ministry becomes involved immediately. We can begin the process of formally registering your imperial claim, which involves notifying the Wisengamot, which also means the ministry becomes involved immediately but on terms more favorable to you. Or, and here something in his eyes shifted, becoming more direct, we can take some time, today, in this room, with your vault records, your lineage documentation, and my knowledge of the relevant law, and we can discuss what a well-prepared emperor looks like, before anyone outside this building knows what the stone found. Harry looked at him. Why are you helping me? He asked. It wasn't suspicion, it was a genuine question, and he asked it the way he asked all genuine questions, directly and without apology. Ragnar studied him for a moment. The Imperial Compact of 832, he said, included provisions for Goblin rights that have been systematically ignored by every provisional government since 1843. The ministry has had 183 years to honor those provisions. It has declined to do so. He paused. The Goblins have been waiting for the legitimate emperor to emerge. It appears we no longer need to wait. Harry thought about this. So this helps you too. Yes. I would be deceiving you if I suggested otherwise. I appreciate that, Harry said, and he meant it. Honesty, in his experience, was so rare in adults that when it arrived it deserved to be acknowledged. All right. Let's talk about what a well-prepared emperor looks like. And so they did. The next 3 hours were the best 3 hours of Harry Potter's life up to that point, which said something both about the quality of the conversation and about the nature of his life up to that point. Ragnarok summoned the vault records. The Potter Vault was, as stated, enormous, generations of accumulated wealth, property deeds, and investments managed by Gringotts in the absence of any legitimate heir. There were properties, a manor in Wales, a townhouse in Edinburgh, a cottage near Godric's Hollow that Harry stared at on the property list for a long time before moving on. There were holdings in magical businesses across Britain and Europe. There were artifacts and library collections of a scale that made the word library feel inadequate. Then there were the imperial accounts. These have not been touched since 1843, Ragnarok said, sliding a second ledger across the table. The imperial treasury is separate from any personal family vault. It is a public trust, held by Gringotts in perpetuity, to be managed by the Emperor on behalf of the magical community. He opened the ledger to the balance page. Harry looked at the number for a while. Right, he said. Quite, said Ragnarok. There were also, as Ragnarok explained methodically, the imperial seats. The Wisingamot currently had a nominal membership of 50 seats. Of those 50, 12 were imperial seats, held in trust, technically casting no vote in the absence of the emperor, their votes effectively nullified rather than transferred, which meant that for 183 years, the Wisingamot had been operating at reduced capacity and nobody had much wanted to publicize the reason. Additionally, the Potter family held 2 further seats in the traditional noble way, and through the Peveril, Gryffindor, and Emery's connections, there were proxy claims on an additional 7 seats whose current holders had, over the generations, forgotten or ignored the obligations those seats carried. 21 seats, Harry said, working through the arithmetic. If all claims are successfully pressed, yes. There are 50 seats in total. A simple majority requires 26. A supermajority requires 34. Ragnarok allowed a thin, controlled version of what might have been a smile. Currently, Dumbledore and his allies hold approximately 22 seats. Fudge's political bloc controls about 15. The remainder are independent but tend toward the institutional status quo. 21 seats would shift that entirely, Harry said. It would. Ragnarok paused. It would also almost certainly prompt an immediate effort to challenge your claims, discredit your assessment, and question your capacity to exercise authority given your age. How do we deal with that? Precedent, Ragnarok said. And speed. If you register your claims correctly, in the right order, with the correct legal documents filed simultaneously, challenging them becomes significantly more difficult. The compact is not a ministry document, it predates the ministry and supersedes it. Challenging it would require the Wisingamot to effectively vote to delegitimize its own authority, which, another thin, controlled expression, is a thing no legislative body has ever willingly done. Harry nodded slowly. What order do we file things in? Ragnarok looked at him for a moment. You ask the right questions, he said, and there was something in his voice that Harry didn't hear very often from adults, genuine approval, offered without the need for it to be flattering. Just a statement of observed fact. Very well. The order matters because each filing builds the legal foundation for the next. First, we register the Potter inheritance. This is already substantially prepared because the bank has been managing the estate. That goes through immediately and is the least controversial step. Second, we file the Peveril succession, which is old enough that almost nobody alive will contest it on personal grounds. Third, the Imperial Compact confirmation, which must be filed simultaneously with the Goblin attestation, meaning our institution formally certifies the assessment results, which makes them legally inadmissible to challenge without challenging US, and challenging Gringotts is, something nobody sane does, Harry said. Correct. Ragnar's expression was entirely neutral. The Gryffindor claim we hold in reserve. It is the most emotionally charged, Hogwarts, founder mythology, all of that, and is best deployed as a response to an anticipated attack rather than an opening move. He paused. And then there is the question of Dumbledore. The room was quiet again. The memory charms, Harry said. Yes. What was done to you is illegal under magical law. It is assault of a magical person, unlawful modification of memory on a minor, and interference with an imperial succession, the last of which carries consequences that make the first two look minor. Ragnar folded his hands. Filing a criminal complaint through the Wisengamot, given that Dumbledore controls a significant portion of it, would be politically complicated. Filing through Gringotts, since the assault affected your ability to manage your accounts and estates, gives us independent standing that bypasses the ministry entirely. Harry was quiet for a moment. Will it hold? It will hold. The precedent is unambiguous. The only question is the response it generates. Ragnar met his eyes. Dumbledore will not be arrested immediately. He is too powerful, too connected, and too widely trusted. What it will do is put him in check, force him to respond rather than act, to defend rather than direct. It changes the shape of the board. Harry understood this. He understood it the way he understood most things he hadn't been directly taught, intuitively, by watching and comparing. The same way he'd figured out that Petunia was more afraid of him than she was contemptuous, and that fear was a thing you could use or dissolve depending on which outcome you wanted. What about the memory charms themselves, he asked. The reversal. That can begin today, if you wish. The first session would be the lightest, the most recent charms, the ones on the surface. We will not attempt all 52 at once. Ragnar paused. I should be clear, this is entirely your choice. Some people, when presented with the option, choose not to recover lost memories, because what is gone does not feel like a loss when you have never known it was there. Harry thought about this seriously. He gave it the weight it deserved. No, he said. I want them back. I want all of it back. He paused. They're mine. Ragnar nodded once, as if this answer had been expected and confirmed something. Then we will schedule the first session for today, Harry said. First session today. Another pause. It will be unpleasant, as I said. I know. Harry looked at the stone, still sitting on the side table, its surface now dark and still. Everything important usually is. The Cursebreaker's name was Griphook, and he was younger than Ragnar with sharper eyes and a kind of manner that suggested he found most problems interesting rather than troubling. He examined the results parchment, cross-examined the stone's secondary read more actions request aborted write the next chapter now. Chapter 2, The Girl Who Read Everything. The first session with Griphook lasted 2 hours and left Harry sitting on the floor of the assessment room with his back against the stone wall and his hands pressed flat against the cold floor, breathing through something that was not quite pain and not quite grief and was somehow worse than either. The memories that came back were not orderly. They arrived the way Ragnar had warned, all at once, a flood with no regard for sequence or context, and the first session had only targeted the 5 most recent charms, the ones Griphook described as the lightest layers, relatively speaking, which told Harry something uncomfortable about what the deeper sessions were going to feel like. 5 memories, and still he'd spent 20 minutes afterwards unable to speak coherently. What came back was not dramatic. That was the strange part. He'd half expected revelations, visions, grand truths, the sort of thing that arrived with orchestral accompaniment. Instead, what came back was small and personal and somehow more devastating for being ordinary. He remembered being 4 years old, sitting in the Dursley's garden, and doing magic intentionally for the first time, not an accident, not a reaction, but a deliberate act of will that had made the rosebush next to him bloom in December. He remembered the fierce, clean joy of it. And then he remembered Petunia coming out of the back door and seeing it, and the look on her face, and a man arriving within the hour, tall, silver-haired, half-moon glasses, and crouching down to Harry's level in the garden and saying, in a very kind voice, "This will be easier if you just relax," and Harry not understanding why he should relax and then not remembering any of it at all. He sat on the floor and breathed. "The disorientation will pass within the hour," Griphook said, from somewhere to his right. He was matter-of-fact about it, which Harry appreciated more than he would have appreciated sympathy. "Drink this." Harry took the small flask without looking at it and drank. It tasted like oversweet pumpkin juice and settled the churning in his head almost immediately, leaving clarity in its wake, sharp and slightly cold, like the aftermath of a fever breaking. He pushed himself up off the floor and sat back in the chair. "Next session," he said. "When?" 3 days at minimum, Griphook said. "The core needs time to stabilize between removals. Rush it and you risk permanently fragmenting the recovered memories, they become impressions rather than recoverable experience." 3 days, Harry said. "Yes. And before you ask, yes, every session will be like this or harder. The deeper charms are older and more firmly bonded." "I know," Harry said. "I'll be back in 3 days." He said it the way you say something you've already decided, which is to say without particular emphasis and with no room for negotiation. Griphook nodded once, in the manner of someone who had registered the fact and filed it appropriately. Ragnarok, who had been present throughout and had managed the entire session with an attentiveness that Harry was beginning to understand was his version of personal investment, set a thick folder on the table beside Harry. "The preliminary filings. The Potter inheritance registration is already complete, it has been lodged and will be formally recorded by midnight tonight. The Peveril succession has been prepared and requires only your signature and a drop of blood to activate the hereditary seal." He paused. "The Imperial Compact confirmation requires slightly more, a formal statement of claim in your own words, which we will record and attest. We can do this now, or you can return when you are less, now," Harry said. He signed the Peveril succession with a borrowed quill and pressed his thumb to the hereditary seal, which flared silver for 3 seconds and then went still. It didn't feel like anything from the outside. From the inside it felt like a door he hadn't known was in the wall clicking quietly into the locked position, or, more accurately, into the unlocked position, which was somehow more significant. The Imperial statement of claim was simpler than he'd expected. He stood in the middle of the room, with Ragnarok and both Goblin witnesses present, and he said clearly, "I am Harry James Potter, heir of the Imperial line of Emrys, and I claim what is mine by blood and compact." The stone on the side table, which had been dark, lit up gold for a full 5 seconds and then went dark again. One of the witnesses made a note. "It is registered," Ragnarok said. "It will reach the Wisengamot's records office in the form of a certified Gringotts notification within 48 hours. He paused. "After that, things will begin to move." "Good," Harry said. He tucked the assessment parchment into the inside of his jacket, one of Dudley's cast-offs, 3 sizes too large, the kind of thing that under normal circumstances would have made him feel small and invisible. He stood up and thought about Dumbledore crouching in Petunia's garden with his kind voice and his half-moon glasses saying this will be easier if you just relax. He walked out of Gringotts into the afternoon sun of Diagon Alley and stood on the bank's top step for a moment, letting the noise and color of the street come back to him. He was 8 years old and technically the Emperor of Magical Britain. He needed a book. Flourish and Blots was busier in the afternoon than it had been when he'd passed it earlier, families with young children, mostly, doing casual summer browsing, people who looked at books the way normal people looked at shops rather than the way Harry looked at books, which was with the specific focused intensity of someone for whom books had always been both company and education. He had money. The concept was still sitting slightly unsteadily in his head. Ragnarok had given him a small drawstring pouch from the Potter vault, enough for immediate needs, he'd said, with the particular Goblin restraint that suggested, immediate needs, had been calculated to last approximately 6 months if carefully managed. Harry looked at it once outside the bank and put it in his pocket and didn't look at it again until he needed it. He went to the magical law section first, found 3 books that looked relevant, one on the Wiesengemots procedural rules, one on ancient house succession law, and one simply called the Imperial Compact, a legal history which had dust on its spine that suggested it hadn't been touched in some time. He took all three. Then he went to the general history section, then a shelf near the back that had books on magical cores and inheritance that he stacked under his arm. He was trying to reach a volume on the top shelf, a comprehensive history of magical Britain, pre-ministry era, its spine reading in faded gold letters, when a voice from his immediate left said, "I've read that one. It's good on the early period but gets sloppy after about 1200, if you care about accuracy." Harry looked sideways. There was a girl standing next to him. She was roughly his age, maybe slightly younger, maybe slightly older, it was hard to tell, with a quantity of bushy brown hair and bright brown eyes behind which something was clearly always running. She was holding 4 books already, which put her in the category of person Harry immediately considered potentially interesting. She was looking at the spine of the book on the top shelf with the expression of someone reassessing a previous judgment. "What's sloppy about it?" Harry asked. The author keeps citing Marchbank's Wizard Chronicles of the Dark Ages as a primary source, but Marchbanks was working from memory 60 years after the fact and had a known political bias toward the Merlin lineage. She paused and reconsidered. Well, toward the idea of the Merlin lineage. Nobody actually knew who the line ran through by then. Another pause. Sorry. I do that. Do what? Start talking about things without checking if the other person wants to hear it. I want to hear it, Harry said. She looked at him with a slight recalibration, the way people did when something they'd braced for didn't happen. You've already got quite a lot of books, she observed, glancing at his armload. I know. Are you a student somewhere? You seem a bit young for most of those. I'm 8, Harry said. I'm not a student anywhere yet. I'm just reading. She appeared to find this entirely reasonable. I'm 8 too. Well, almost 9. She shifted her own books. I'm Hermione Granger. My parents are dentists. I found out I was a witch about 3 weeks ago when I accidentally turned my bedroom wall transparent during an argument about homework, and I've been in here every day since because there's an enormous amount of catching up to do and I find it easier to process new information if I'm well prepared in advance. Harry considered her. She said everything in one breath, like she was afraid of being interrupted before she finished, and she had the particular energy of someone whose mind moved faster than most conversations could keep up with and had learned to preempt the gaps. He found he liked her almost immediately, which was unusual for him. He generally needed more data. I'm Harry Potter, he said. She looked at him. Her expression went through several things in quick succession: recognition, recalibration, something that might have been the suppression of a very long list of questions, and then settled on what appeared to be a deliberate return to the previous conversational register. The magical law books, she said. Are you doing research for something specific? Yes, he said. Quite specific. She glanced at the spines. Wiesengemot procedural rules and standing orders. The Imperial Compact, a legal history. Her eyes came back to his face. That's a very unusual reading list for an 8-year-old. I'm in an unusual situation. Another recalibration. She was good at them, quick, unsentimental, moving immediately to the next relevant question rather than getting stuck on the last answer. Is there anything I can help with? I don't mean that presumptuously, I just mean that I've already read quite a lot of the early magical history section, and if you're cross-referencing something, 2 people going through source material is faster than 1. Harry looked at her. He had been thinking, since leaving Gringotts, about the problem of trust. Ragnarok was an ally with transparent motivations. The Goblin had been clear about what he wanted from the arrangement, which made him reliable. Dumbledore's pattern was the opposite. He clearly believed his motivations were pure, which made him far more dangerous. What Harry needed, beyond legal filings and vault access and goblin law expertise, was someone who could move in the wizarding world the way he couldn't yet, who could read and synthesize information quickly, who would challenge him when he was wrong and not because of a political agenda, and who had no existing stake in the institutional structures he was about to rearrange. A girl who was almost 9, who had turned her bedroom wall transparent 3 weeks ago and had been reading magical history every day since, and whose first response to him claiming he was in an unusual situation had been to offer research assistance rather than ask what the situation was. "Are your parents nearby?" he asked. "In the bookshop, yes. My mum's looking at the field guides." She tilted her head. "Why?" "I'm going to buy these books, find somewhere to sit, and start reading. If you wanted to stay and help cross-reference, I'd welcome it." He paused. "I should tell you that I'm involved in something that might become complicated. Politically. I'm not going to tell you the details today because I only met you 3 minutes ago, but I'll tell you they're significant, and if you help me research and I tell you what I'm looking for, you might figure some of it out yourself." She considered this with evident seriousness. "That's a very honest way to not tell me something." "I try not to lie when I don't have to," Harry said. "It's inefficient." The corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, more like the recognition of something she approved of. "Give me 2 minutes to find my mum," she said, "and tell her I'm staying in the reading area." She was back in 1 minute and 40 seconds, which Harry clocked with the mental stopwatch he'd developed as a survival mechanism in the Dursley household and had since discovered had broader applications. She dropped into the chair across from him at the reading table in the back of the shop and pulled a notebook from her bag with the practiced motion of someone for whom a notebook was a permanent appendage. "Right," she said. "What are we looking for?" "Legal precedents for imperial succession claims," Harry said. "Specifically, cases where a succession was made after a long abeyance period. I want to know what challenges were historically raised, what arguments succeeded in supporting the claim, and whether there are any cases involving contested guardian arrangements over a claimant." Hermione was already writing. "Which empire specifically?" "There are several in the historical record." "British magical." "Emery's line." She stopped writing. She looked at him over her notebook with an expression that was doing the same thing as before, rapid processing, followed by deliberate composure. "The Emery's imperial line," she said carefully, "has been in abeyance since 1843. "I know. The last confirmed claimant died without issue." "That's not entirely accurate. There are some problems with how that succession was recorded. They're mostly in Marchbanks and in the post-1800 section of Bin's History of Magical Governance, the parts where, as you said, things get sloppy." He kept his voice completely neutral. "Start with the Wickham succession case of 1761. That's the most relevant precedent. I'll take the compact history." Hermione looked at him for 3 full seconds. Then she turned to her stack of books, found a history of magical governance with the efficiency of someone who had already indexed the reading area's stock mentally, opened it, and began to read. Harry opened the Imperial Compact, a legal history, and started from page 1. They read in silence for 40 minutes. It was the most comfortable silence Harry had ever sat in, which was a low bar given the competition, but was also genuinely pleasant, the specific comfort of being near someone who was also reading seriously, whose presence didn't create an obligation to perform or explain or diminish. Hermione took notes continuously. Harry underlined in pencil, with her permission, which she'd granted with the slightly pained expression of someone who loved books too much to enjoy seeing them annotated but had acknowledged the practical argument. "The Wickham case," Hermione said, without looking up. "They challenged the succession on the grounds that the claimant had been unaware of the claim during the abeyance period and therefore could not have acted to preserve it." "What was the ruling?" "Dismissed. The precedent says an imperial bloodline claim cannot be voided by the claimant's ignorance, particularly when the ignorance was caused by external circumstance rather than deliberate inaction." She paused. "It actually says particularly when the ignorance was deliberately engineered by interested parties. That's the exact phrasing." Harry looked up. Hermione was looking at him now. Her pen was still. "Deliberately engineered ignorance," she said, slowly. "Is that why we're looking at this?" "Part of why," he said. She looked at him for another long moment. She closed her notebook, put her pen down, and folded her hands on the table in a gesture that looked like it belonged to a much older person and was somehow entirely natural on her. "Harry," she said. "How many books did you buy today on Wiesengemot law?" "3. And you came to Gringotts this morning. I saw you going in when my mum and I were walking past. Actually, I remembered because you were alone and you looked very focused for someone who was 8. Did something happen at Gringotts?" "Yes," he said. "Something significant." "Quite." She took a careful breath. "I'm not going to push you to tell me more than you want to. But I want to say something, and I want you to take it seriously rather than dismissing it because we only met an hour ago." "Say it." "Whatever you're doing, it sounds large, and it sounds like you're planning to do it largely alone, and I think you're very intelligent, and I don't mean that as flattery, I just think it's observable, but I also think that the kind of large complicated thing you seem to be planning requires, not just research support, but someone who will tell you when you're wrong. And I'm very good at that." She paused. "I'm good at research. I'm good at finding things. And I'm honest to a fault, which I know isn't always comfortable, but I suspect for you specifically it might actually be useful." Harry looked at her. He thought about Ragnar's careful, transparent alliance. He thought about Dumbledore's careful, opaque management. He thought about what it would mean to have someone in his corner who had nothing to gain and nothing to hide and whose primary qualification was being relentlessly honest. "You should know that once you're involved," he said, "it gets complicated for you too. Politically. People who want to stop me will look at everyone around me." "I lived for 8 years without knowing the magical world existed," Hermione said. "I found out 3 weeks ago. I don't have a political position in any of this. That might actually be an advantage." He almost smiled. "It might," he agreed. "All right. But not today. I need to give you the full version, and I need a bit more time to decide the right order to explain it in so that it's comprehensible rather than just overwhelming." "That's entirely reasonable." She picked up her pen and opened her notebook again. "In the meantime, should I keep going on the Wickham precedents?" "Please," Harry said. "And look for anything on memory charm interference with inheritance rights. That'll be useful too." She found it 40 minutes later, in a supplementary volume she'd gone to retrieve from the shelf while Harry was working through the compact text, and she set it in front of him with her finger on the paragraph and did not say anything because she could tell by his face that she didn't need to. The paragraph said that the deliberate application of memory modification charms to prevent a claimant from exercising inheritance rights was classified under the Gringotts Wizard Accords as grand magical larceny, one of only 7 crimes under the Accords that carried mandatory Wiesengemot trial regardless of the defendant's standing or position. Regardless of standing or position. Harry read it twice. He copied it, in his neat, careful handwriting, into the margin of his own notebook. Hermione watched him do it. "Whoever did this to you," she said quietly, "is in quite serious trouble." "They will be," Harry said. "Eventually." He paused. "His name is Dumbledore." Hermione was quiet for a moment. "Albus Dumbledore? Headmaster of Hogwarts? Considered the greatest wizard alive?" "Yes." Another pause. "Right," she said. And then, demonstrating exactly why Harry had, in the space of 2 hours, decided she was worth trusting, "So we need to be very careful about the order in which we move, because his institutional backing means a frontal challenge fails. We need the legal foundations completely solid before any of this becomes public." She glanced at his law books. "You already know that." "I already know that," he confirmed. "Good." She turned back to her notes. "Then let's keep going." By the time Hermione's mother appeared at the end of the reading table at 5:30, a pleasant-looking woman with the same bright eyes and a somewhat bemused expression at finding her daughter deep in an apparent research project with an unknown boy, they had filled a combined total of 40 pages of notes between them and identified 6 more relevant legal precedents and had a working framework for the order of filing that Ragnar had outlined, now bolstered with specific case citations. Hermione, her mother said, in the tone of a parent who has had many identical conversations, we need to go. 5 minutes, Hermione said, still writing. Now, love. Hermione capped her pen with the air of someone making a significant concession. She looked at Harry. We're staying at a Magical World bed and breakfast on Charing Cross Road while I do my shopping this week. If you need to reach me, do witches and wizards use owls? I read that they do. I'll find out, Harry said. You should take this. He wrote his name in the top corner of one of his note pages, tore it off, and gave it to her. It was an impulse, but it was a good one, he could feel the difference. In case you find something useful before we next speak. She took it and tucked it in her notebook without looking at it, which suggested she'd already memorized it. I'll look up the memory modification statutes tonight, she said. There might be more relevant provisions than the one we found. Hermione, said her mother. Bye, Hermione said to Harry, and picked up her stack of books and followed her mother toward the front of the shop, pausing briefly to return 3 of the volumes to their correct places on the shelf with the automatic precision of someone incapable of leaving books in the wrong location. Harry watched her go. He sat for a moment in the quiet of the reading area with his stack of books and his 40 pages of notes and the assessment parchment folded inside his jacket, and thought about the day. He thought about the stone going white under his hand and the quill moving faster and Ragnar's face shifting with that particular sharpening. He thought about Grip Hook and the flood of returned memory and the rosebush blooming in December and Dumbledore's kind voice. He thought about the number in the Imperial Treasury ledger. He thought about 52. Then he gathered his books, paid for them at the front counter, and walked back out into the evening alley. A ministry owl found him just outside the door. It was a large official bird, gray and impersonal, and it dropped a sealed envelope on him with the indifferent accuracy of a trained postal animal and departed without waiting for a response. Harry looked at the seal, the ministry's spinning wheel and wand crest, stamped in red wax, and opened it. Dear Mr. Potter, it has come to the attention of the Department of Magical Governance that an inheritance assessment was conducted at Gringotts Bank today in your name. The Ministry wishes to advise that matters pertaining to the Imperial Compact of 832 are currently under the jurisdiction of the Office of Historical Magical Records, and that any claims arising from said assessment should be directed to that office before any formal filings are made. Please contact the office at your earliest convenience. Yours sincerely, Pete Greengrass, Deputy Assistant, Office of Historical Magical Records. Harry read it twice. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket alongside the assessment parchment. Someone at the ministry had been informed of the assessment within hours of it taking place. Which meant either Gringotts had been more forthcoming with the ministry than Ragnar had implied, which he considered unlikely, since Ragnar had very specific reasons to not involve the ministry prematurely, or someone at the ministry had been watching for exactly this kind of assessment result. Which meant someone at the ministry already knew, or suspected, what the stone might find. Harry thought about that for a block and a half of Diagon Alley, passing shops closing for the evening, a witch locking up an apothecary, a wizard arguing with his broom, and by the time he reached the entrance to the leaky cauldron he had thought through the implications thoroughly enough to feel the shape of it. Dumbledore had allies in the ministry. The assessment results had been flagged. Someone was trying to redirect him through bureaucratic channels before the Imperial filing could land, trying to get him into an office somewhere where a very reasonable, very polite official could explain to him why his claim required further review, further documentation, further delay. He walked through the leaky cauldron. Tom the barman raised a hand in greeting and Harry nodded back. He went home. The week that followed was quietly extraordinary. Ragnar sent an update the next morning, his formal Goblin correspondence arriving via the smallest, most businesslike owl Harry had ever seen, which landed on the Dursley kitchen windowsill, dropped an envelope, and left before Petunia could do more than produce a strangled sound. The Potter inheritance was confirmed and registered. The Peveril succession had been accepted. The Imperial Compact notification was in transit to the Wisengamot Records office. And Gringotts had formally filed the grand magical larceny complaint against Albus Dumbledore. The second morning, a different owl arrived, this one more agitated, cream-colored and official, bearing a letter not from the polite deputy assistant but from someone considerably higher in the ministry's food chain. The minister himself wishes to arrange a meeting at your earliest convenience. Harry wrote back, I'm 8. I find it difficult to arrange meetings independently. Perhaps the minister could arrange transportation. He was fairly confident Ragnarok would approve of this response. He sent it. The third morning, he went back to Gringotts. Griphook was waiting. The second session was, as advertised, worse than the first. He sat on the floor afterwards for longer, pressed against the cold stone wall with his knees drawn up, and breathed through a returning tide of memory that was less about specific moments and more about emotional truth, the feeling of being safe, somewhere, with someone warm and safe and certain, and the feeling of that safety ending not gradually but all at once. He didn't cry. He was aware that not crying wasn't necessarily admirable, it was more a function of the specific way grief arrived in him, interior rather than expressed, something he'd have to examine later when he had more data to examine it with. Griphook gave him the flask again. He drank. Clarity arrived. What came back? Ragnarok asked, from his chair. Feelings, mostly. Impressions. Harry considered it. There was a house. A different house, not Privet Drive. And voices. My mother. He paused. She talked to me the way people talk to someone they expect to talk back. Ragnarok was quiet for a moment. Your mother, he said, with the careful neutrality of someone managing their own response, was by all our records an extraordinary witch. She managed her family vault personally from age 17, which is unusual. She asked better questions than most adults. He paused. You are, if you will permit me to observe it, very like what I imagined she would have expected you to be. Harry looked at him. It was the most personal thing Ragnarok had said, and it sat in his chest with a weight he hadn't expected. Thank you, he said. He meant it in a way that he suspected Ragnarok understood. That evening, Hermione's owl found him. It was a school owl borrowed from the magical bed and breakfast, a slightly scruffy tawny bird that arrived at his cupboard window, which he'd left unlatched on the basis that restricting communication was a bad strategic choice, and deposited a letter with 3 full pages of notes on memory modification statutes, including 2 provisions Harry and Ragnarok hadn't found, one of which was specifically relevant to claims involving minors. At the bottom of the 3rd page, in slightly smaller writing, I've been thinking about this quite a lot. I think the deputy assistant's letter was a delaying tactic. I think someone is trying to get you into a room where they can explain you out of your own claim before it solidifies. I think you already know this. I just wanted to say it in case it was useful to have someone else say it. Also, I found a book about the Emery's line at the back of the history section that I don't think anyone has taken off the shelf since approximately 1960. I'm keeping it for now. H.G. Harry wrote back. He told her she was right about the delaying tactic. He told her the Gringotts filing had been sent. He told her the Wisengamot notification was in transit. And then, because she had been straightforwardly honest with him and had offered to tell him when he was wrong and had spent an evening reading about memory modification statutes on his behalf, he told her the rest of it. All of it. The stone, the 52, the lineage, the number in the imperial treasury, the Wickham precedent and why it applied. He told her he was the Emperor of Magical Britain. He went to sleep not entirely sure how she would respond to that. Her owl was back by 6 in the morning. He opened the window in the dark, took the letter, and read it by the thin thread of light from the street lamp outside. Right, she wrote. That explains quite a lot. I had 3 or 4 explanations worked out, but the imperial one is the one that fits all the evidence. I want to say that I'm aware this is quite extraordinary and I don't want to be insufficiently odd about it, but the most useful thing I can offer right now is probably not all, so I'll say instead that the legal framework seems sound and the precedents are solid and Ragnarok seems to know what he's doing. I also want to say, and you can ignore this if it seems too personal, that I think what was done to you is one of the most despicable things I've read about. I read quite a lot. It is genuinely near the top of the list. I'm back in London until Friday. Can we meet at Flourish and Blots tomorrow morning? I have the book. Harry smiled. He hadn't done that in some time. It felt slightly unfamiliar, but in a good way, like a word coming back to you in a language you'd been neglecting. He wrote back, yes. 9 o'clock. I'll bring my notes. Outside in the quiet street, a ministry owl sat on the garden wall and watched the house. Harry noticed it when he passed the window. It had been there since yesterday morning. He noticed, too, that it wasn't delivering anything. It was watching. He had expected this. He drew the curtain and went back to his notes and began drafting, in his careful handwriting, the formal response to the minister's meeting request, not a refusal, not yet, but a counter-proposal with terms attached that would be either accepted or refused, and either outcome would tell him something useful. Dear Minister Fudge, he wrote. Thank you for your request for a meeting. I am happy to meet, subject to the following conditions. Outside, the ministry owl ruffled its feathers in the cold morning and waited. On Friday, when Hermione left London, she pressed the book on the Emery's line into Harry's hands at the entrance to the leaky cauldron where her parents were waiting with their car. She had borrowed it under her own name and had the slightly conflicted expression of someone planning to return it eventually but accepting that the current need outweighed the library ethic. There's a chapter in the middle, she said. Chapter 7. About the Emperor's court. Read it. What does it say? It says the Emperor's power was never meant to be solitary. There's a structure, a court, advisors, a council, magical bonds of alliance. It was designed for more than one person. She paused. I think that's relevant to what you're building. Harry looked at her. I've only told 2 people what I'm building. 3, now, counting me. 3 people total. That's quite a small court for an emperor, she said, with the particular Hermione Granger smile that was less like a smile and more like a sharpened thought that had found the right shape. It's a start, Harry said. Her father called her name from the car. She turned and then turned back. I'll write. And I'll be at Hogwarts in 3 years. I'm planning to be sorted into Gryffindor. She said it like a scheduled appointment. In case that's useful information. Very useful, Harry said. He watched her get in the car. He stood on the pavement with the book under his arm while the Grangers' car indicated and pulled out into the London traffic, and he felt something solidify in his chest, not a grand thing, not a political thing, just the quiet, durable feeling of a foundation being poured. He opened the book to chapter 7 on the walk back. The ministry owl, he noticed, was gone. Something else was beginning. Chapter 3, Old Houses, Old Debts. The letter to Longbottom Manor went through Gringotts. Ragnarok had suggested it, citing the fact that direct post between noble houses carried a traditional weight that ordinary owl delivery didn't, something about the precedent of formal interhouse correspondence dating back to the founder's era, with specific resonance for houses that still observed the old courtesies. Harry had listened, understood the strategic point immediately, and asked Ragnarok to draft the appropriate format while he drafted the content. The content was simple. He was Harry Potter, heir of the ancient and noble house of Potter, now confirmed also as heir of the houses Peveril and Emrys. He was writing to Lady Augusta Longbottom in her capacity as head of the ancient and noble house of Longbottom, regarding matters of shared interest pertaining to the current state of the Wisingamot and the imperial filings recently lodged with that body. He would be grateful for the opportunity to call upon her at her earliest convenience. He signed it with the Potter seal, the Peveril seal, and the newly confirmed imperial seal, which Ragnarok had produced from the deepest vaults with an expression of studied calm that didn't quite conceal how significant the moment was. 3 seals on a letter from an 8-year-old. He tried to imagine Augusta Longbottom's face when she opened it. He suspected it would be worth seeing. Her response arrived the following morning, brought not by owl but by a house elf who appeared in the kitchen of number 4, Privet Drive, bowed to Harry with a depth that suggested genuine respect rather than magical compulsion, placed the envelope in his hands, and vanished. Petunia, who had been making tea, made a sound that was difficult to categorize and did not look at Harry for the rest of the morning. Augusta Longbottom's handwriting was decisive. Capital letters that meant what they said. Saturday. 2 o'clock. I will send transportation. Do not be late. Harry wrote back, I am never late. He sent it via the Gringotts owl because he didn't have a house elf, and he thought she would appreciate the parallel precision. Saturday arrived cold and bright. The transportation Augusta Longbottom sent was a carriage, an actual carriage, drawn by two dark grey thestrals whose invisible forms Harry could hear but not see, the leather harness moving through the air on its own from the perspective of anyone watching from Privet Drive, which was another thing Petunia was going to need to process. Harry climbed in without ceremony, and the carriage moved through London in a way that suggested it was operating slightly sideways from normal traffic, because no one seemed to notice it, and twice it appeared to pass directly through a red light at a junction without consequence. Longbottom Manor was in Somerset, a large, grey stone house set back from a lane lined with old trees, the kind of house that hadn't been built for appearances but had been standing long enough that it had acquired a gravity of its own. The grounds were immaculate. A peacock crossed the gravel drive as the carriage arrived, with the specific indifference of an animal that had decided long ago it owned the property and everyone in it was merely visiting. Harry stepped down. A house elf took the carriage. The front door opened before he reached it. Augusta Longbottom was shorter than he'd expected, which was the first thing, and then immediately not the most important thing, because what she was above all was present, the specific quality of attention that some people had where they occupied the space around them completely, without effort, and everything else in the space had to account for itself. She was in her 70s with white hair pinned under a hat that had a stuffed vulture on it, which Harry chose not to remark on. Her eyes were sharp and dark and moved over him with the comprehensive assessment of someone cataloging information she intended to use. "You're small," she said. "Yes," Harry said. "Come in." The entrance hall had portraits, generations of Longbottoms, all watching with the alert attention of portrait subjects who kept themselves informed. Harry followed Augusta into a sitting room where a fire was burning and a tea service was already laid, and where a boy was sitting on the window seat with a pot of something that might have been a plant in his lap, looking at Harry with the expression of someone who had been told a guest was coming and was still deciding how to feel about it. He was roughly Harry's age, slightly heavier, with a round face and light brown eyes and the kind of manner that suggested he was most comfortable when he wasn't being watched, which meant he was permanently slightly uncomfortable. He had dirt on his hands from the plant pot. "My grandson, Neville," Augusta said. "Neville, this is Harry Potter." "I know who he is," Neville said. Not rudely, observationally, with the slight defensiveness of someone preempting the assumption that he needed things explained. He looked at Harry. "She said you sent a letter with 3 seals on it." "I did," Harry said. "That's a lot of seals." "It's a lot of houses," Harry said. Something shifted in Neville's expression, not warmth yet, but the door cracking open. He looked back down at his plant. Augusta poured tea as if the most natural thing in the world were for a small boy with 3 noble house seals to call upon her on a Saturday. She gave Harry his cup and sat across from him with the direct, unornamented bearing of someone who had long ago decided that social niceties were a coating over conversations that could happen perfectly well without them. "The imperial filing has caused considerable consternation," she said. "I imagine you know that." "I expected it to," Harry said. The Wisengamot notification arrived Wednesday. By Thursday, Dumbledore had called an informal session, not a formal sitting, a consultation, which doesn't require full attendance and therefore doesn't create a formal record. 17 members attended. I was not invited. Her tone did not change. I heard about it from Griselda Marchbanks, who attended and found it distasteful. What was decided? Nothing was decided formally. Nothing can be decided formally without a full sitting. But the thrust of the conversation, from what Griselda reported, was toward treating the filing as a procedural anomaly arising from an incomplete assessment, and finding grounds to have it reviewed before any claims could be formally registered. Augusta sipped her tea. Dumbledore suggested that an 8-year-old child presenting alone for an inheritance assessment, without magical guardian present, might constitute grounds to challenge the assessment's validity. Harry thought about this. My magical guardian, he said, keeping his voice entirely even, is the person who cast 52 memory charms on me over 6 years. The Gringotts filing notes that his guardianship, under the Imperial Compact, was invalid from the moment I was confirmed as Emperor. He cannot be both my guardian and the person who illegally prevented me from knowing I had grounds to refuse that guardianship. Augusta was quiet for a moment. Her expression was, not shock, exactly. She had the look of someone receiving information she had half suspected for some time and was now processing the confirmation of it. 52, she said. 52, Harry confirmed. Augusta put down her teacup with a care that suggested she was managing something that wanted to be less controlled. I have known Albus Dumbledore for 50 years, she said. I have disagreed with him on a great many things. I have never, she stopped. Started again. I have never doubted that his intentions were what he said they were. However, intentions and actions are not the same thing, and that number represents, that is an extraordinary level of interference. Yes, Harry said simply. She looked at him. Really looked, in the way she had at the door. How are you so calm about this? I'm not particularly calm, Harry said. I'm just better at being angry on a delay. I'll process it later when it's more useful. Neville, from the window seat, had gone very still. His plant pot was sitting on the sill now, forgotten. He was watching Harry with the specific attention of someone who had heard something that resonated somewhere personal. Gran, Neville said. What happened to Mum and Dad? It wasn't quite a question. Augusta's expression shifted, pain moved through it and was contained, the way someone contains pain they have been containing for a long time and have become very practiced at. She did not answer immediately. Your parents, Harry said to Neville, because he'd done his reading and Ragnarok had provided Wisengamot records and some things were findable, were tortured into insanity by Death Eaters who were never properly prosecuted. The trial was, Harry, Augusta said quietly. Incomplete, Harry finished, adjusting. He looked at Neville. I'm sorry. That was blunt. No, Neville said. He had gone slightly pale but his jaw was set. It's true. Nobody ever says it like that. Everyone says what happened to your parents like it's a weather event rather than something that people did and then mostly got away with. He paused. Sorry, Gran. Don't apologize, Augusta said, and her voice had something rougher in it now, underneath the precision. He's right. It's the truth. The fire crackled. The peacock outside made a sound like a question. The Lestranges, Harry said. Bellatrix, Rodolphus, and Rabaston. They were tried. Convicted. They're in Azkaban. He paused. But the trials themselves were rushed, and there were questions about the evidence handling, and there were people in the ministry at the time who should have faced inquiry and didn't. Augusta looked at him steadily. How much do you know about ministry records of that period? Ragnarok gave me access to the Gringotts archive, Harry said. They have independent records of all property seizures and Wisengamot proceedings from the immediate post-Voldemort period. They're more complete than the ministry's own records, which have some notable gaps. Neville flinched slightly at the name. Harry noticed but didn't adjust. The name was a word. Words only held power if you gave it to them. The gaps in the ministry records, Augusta said slowly. You're suggesting those gaps are deliberate. Some of them, Harry said. Not all. Some are just poor record-keeping. But there are specific cases, trial records, evidence logs, witness testimony, where the gaps are consistent in a way that random administrative failure wouldn't produce. Who benefited from those gaps? Several people. Some of whom are currently sitting Wisengamot members. Harry picked up his tea. Which is part of why I'm here. Augusta looked at him for a long moment. The fire shifted and threw new light across her face, and Harry could see in her expression the thing he'd hoped to find, not a politician calculating advantage, but something older and more reliable. Outrage at genuine injustice, contained within the kind of discipline that meant it could be used. "What is it you want from House Longbottom?" she asked. "Your 2 Wisengamot seats," Harry said. "Active, voting, present. There are 3 matters that will come to a vote within the next 6 months, the confirmation of the Imperial claim, the inquiry into the Ministry's handling of post-war Death Eater trials, and a motion I intend to introduce regarding the legal rights of beings currently denied them under existing Ministry classification." He paused. "I need votes. But more than that, I need people with credibility in that chamber who are genuinely convinced rather than politically maneuvered. Because Dumbledore's going to challenge everything I do, and when he does, I need the people supporting me to be there because they believe in the cause, not because I've offered them something." Augusta stared at him. "You're 8, she said. "Everyone keeps saying that," Harry said. "It bears repeating," she said. "Because what you're describing is a political strategy that a seasoned Wisengamot veteran would struggle to execute, and you are 8. "Yes." He set down his tea. "Would you like me to be older?" "Because I genuinely cannot help that." Augusta Longbottom did something that, from the way it rearranged her face, appeared to be a thing she did infrequently. She laughed. Not a polished social laugh, a real one, short and genuine, surprised out of her by something she hadn't expected. She pressed her lips together afterwards in the manner of someone reasserting professional composure. Neville was grinning, which was the first time his face had done that since Harry arrived. "The Longbottom seats," Augusta said, back to business with an efficiency that Harry respected. "I will commit them to the Imperial confirmation vote on one condition." "Name it." "The inquiry into the post-war Death Eater trials." Her voice went flat and deliberate, each word placed like a stone. "It must be a real inquiry. Not a committee that meets twice and produces a report nobody reads. Real. Independent. With authority to subpoena records and compel testimony." "That was my intention," Harry said. "The Gringotts archive will be made available as an independent evidence source, which means the Ministry can't selectively produce documents without it being obvious." Augusta nodded once. "Then you have the Longbottom seats." Harry held her gaze. "Thank you." "Don't thank me," she said, not unkindly. "Earn it." Neville caught him in the entrance hall as Augusta disappeared to find a specific document she'd referred to, something about historical voting records that she wanted Harry to see. He appeared at Harry's elbow with the slightly urgent manner of someone who had been waiting for a gap in the adult conversation to say something. "The thing you said," Neville said. "About what happened to my parents. The way you said it." He stopped. Started again. "Everyone at school says I'm sorry about your parents, like they feel bad for me but also a bit relieved it isn't them. And the adults all say things like they were very brave and they sacrificed themselves, which is true but it makes it sound finished. Like it happened and it's over and we've all made our peace with it." "But you haven't," Harry said. Neville looked at the floor and then back up. "I love my parents," he said, with a directness that was clearly costing him something. "I visit them every week. They don't know who I am most of the time. My mum gives me sweet wrappers sometimes because she saves them and she likes the colors and she smiles when she does it and I keep every single one of them." His jaw was tight. "So no. We haven't made our peace with it. Gran has made peace with not making peace with it, which is different. And he stopped. Harry waited. He didn't fill the silence. He'd learned that some things needed the room to arrive in. "I want to be at Hogwarts," Neville said. "I want to be a proper wizard. But I'm not very good yet, the magic doesn't always come when I want it to. Gran thinks I might be a squib." He said the word with the specific flatness of someone who had heard it used about him, in that way people used words about children while apparently forgetting children had ears. "But I don't think I am. I think there's something there, it's just stuck. I was told my magic didn't present normally either, Harry said. When I was your age, I thought I was just different. Turns out it was being blocked, partly. He paused. Have you ever had a magical assessment? Neville shook his head. You should, Harry said. Gringotts. Tell Ragnarok I sent you. He considered the boy in front of him, the stubbornness hiding under the self-doubt, the precision of his care for something as small as sweet wrappers. You're not a squib. I don't think people get passionate about plants the way you clearly are without some magic behind it. Neville looked at him. How do you know I'm passionate about plants? You kept your hand on that pot the entire time we were talking about something genuinely distressing. People hold on to their comfort objects when things are hard. That one's yours. Harry shrugged. Nothing wrong with it. Everyone has something. Neville was quiet for a moment. What's yours? Harry thought about this. He thought about the smooth black stone in his pillowcase and the photograph of his mother's red hair. Still figuring that out, he said. I'll let you know. Augusta reappeared with a roll of parchment and the discussion moved on, but something had shifted in the entrance hall between the two boys, something the same size as what had shifted in the bookshop between Harry and Hermione, which was to say not grand but real, and therefore the more durable kind. The formal conversation lasted another hour. Augusta walked Harry through the current composition of the Wizengamot with the precision of a general briefing on terrain, who held which seats, who owed allegiance to whom, who was technically independent but practically in Dumbledore's pocket, who was in Fudge's, and the critical block of genuinely uncommitted members whose votes were determined by whoever made the most coherent argument on the day. Tiberius Ogden, she said. He is the most important of the independent votes. He has been in that chamber for 40 years and he has never voted with the bloc once, only on his own analysis. He is not corruptible and he is not easily impressed. She paused. He will be impressed by the legal substance of your claim. He will be considerably more impressed if you can present it yourself, in person, at a formal sitting. I intend to, Harry said. You're 8. I know. The Imperial Compact has no minimum age of accession. I checked. Augusta looked at him with the expression he was beginning to recognize from her, something between resignation and respect. The informal sitting Dumbledore called. It produced a motion to petition Gringotts to delay the filing on grounds of, and I'm quoting Griselda here, the extraordinary and unprecedented nature of the claim warranting additional due diligence. Gringotts will not delay, Harry said. No. They won't. Augusta set her parchment down. But Dumbledore knows that. The motion isn't about actually delaying the filing. It's about having a recorded concern on the books before the confirmation vote, so that when he votes against confirmation he can point to a procedural objection rather than admitting he's opposing the legitimate heir of an imperial line. She paused. He's protecting his reputation more than his position. He knows the position may be lost. The reputation he will fight for until the end. That's useful to know, Harry said. Everything about the man is useful to know. There was something measured in Augusta's voice, not hatred, not the clean anger she'd shown about Neville's parents. Something older and more complicated, like a verdict that had taken a long time to arrive. I have sat in the Wizengamot with Albus Dumbledore since I was 34 years old. I have watched him maneuver and manage and arrange people into positions he needed them in, and I have always told myself the ends justified his means because his ends were usually good. I find I can no longer tell myself that. The fire had burned lower. The afternoon light through the windows was going amber and thin. What will he do, Harry asked, when the confirmation vote happens and he loses it? Augusta was quiet for a moment. Accept it publicly. Work against it privately. He will not openly oppose a legitimate imperial claim, that would end him politically and he knows it. But he will look for pressure points. Things he can use. She looked at Harry carefully. People close to you. Anyone who can be used as leverage. I know, Harry said. You'll need to move faster than he can react. That's why I'm here on a Saturday rather than waiting for the formal sitting to introduce myself. He picked up his tea, which had gone cold. Speaking of which, I need to visit Griselda Marchbanks and Tiberius Ogden before the sitting. Separately, not together. Do you have connections with either of them? Augusta looked at him for 3 long seconds. I'll write to Griselda today, she said. Tiberius is more independent, he won't appreciate being approached through intermediaries. You'll need to contact him directly, through Gringotts' formal house correspondence, same as you contacted me. She paused. He will likely say yes simply because the letter will come with 3 seals and he'll be curious enough to see what you're like in person. Good, Harry said. He stayed another 30 minutes, working through the procedural mechanics of a formal Wiesengemot sitting with Augusta's ruthless clarity as a guide. When he finally stood to leave, the Thestral's carriage was already waiting in the drive, the harness moving on its own in the evening air, the invisible animals patient and still. Neville came to the door. He had his plant pot again. Harry, he said. Harry turned. When I come to Gringotts, Neville said. For the assessment. Will you be there? If you want me there, Harry said. Yes. Neville nodded. He looked slightly less stuck than he had when Harry arrived. It was a small thing. Harry thought it was probably important. The ministry sent 3 more letters that week. The first was from Fudge himself, more personal in tone than Harry had expected, almost friendly, containing several things that might have been olive branches if you squinted at them, references to a mutual desire to see magical Britain prospering, carefully neutral language about the imperial filing as a significant development, and an invitation to visit the ministry for what was described as an informal conversation with no agenda. Harry showed it to Ragnarok, who identified 7 embedded persuasion enchantments woven into the parchment that activated on reading. Harry wrote back without touching the original letter again. Dear Minister Fudge, thank you for your correspondence. I note the persuasion enchantments on your parchment. I look forward to our future conversations, which I hope will not require such assistance. Harry Potter. The second letter was from the Office of Historical Magical Records again, more pointed this time, something about a 30-day review period that was apparently standard for Imperial Compact activations, a procedure Harry was fairly certain had been invented in the last week. He forwarded it to Ragnarok with a note asking for the precedent source for this 30-day review period. Ragnarok's response was a single line, no such precedent exists. I have replied accordingly. The third letter was not from anyone official. It was written in a hand that was old but steady, on heavy cream parchment, sealed with plain green wax bearing no crest. It read, Dear Mr. Potter, I imagine the last few weeks have been rather eventful. I have been watching the Wiesengemot correspondence with great attention and I must say your approach has been architecturally sound, the layered filings, the Gringotts backing, the sequenced claim registrations. Someone has advised you well. I would like the opportunity to speak with you. Not to dissuade you from anything, I think it far too late for that, and in truth I am not certain I would wish to. But there are things you don't yet know that you should, and things I believe I owe you regardless of outcome. I have made mistakes where you are concerned. I do not expect forgiveness, and I will not insult you by asking for it. But I think you deserve explanations from the source rather than through documents and second-hand accounts. If you are willing, I will come wherever you prefer. You may set any terms you consider appropriate. Albus Dumbledore. Harry sat in his cupboard for a long time with this letter in his hands. He thought about the garden. He thought about this will be easier if you just relax and the rosebush and the specific experience of being 4 years old and having your own mind quietly rearranged by someone who had decided to do it for your own good. He thought about 52. He thought about what Ragnarok had said, one caster, consistent signature, and the absence of any attempt at concealment, which itself said something. Dumbledore had not tried to hide what he'd done. He'd simply done it in the certainty that Harry would never know. He thought about what Augusta had said. He will not openly oppose a legitimate imperial claim. But he will look for pressure points. And then he thought about something else, something that was harder to think, but he made himself think it anyway because he had a policy about hard things, which was that avoiding them cost more than facing them. The letter was not the letter of someone trying to manage a situation. It was too direct for that. The acknowledgement of mistakes, the absence of justification, the "I do not expect forgiveness," those were not the moves of a man who was still trying to win. They were the moves of a man who was beginning to understand he had lost something more significant than a political position. He did not know what to do with that. He set it aside for later. He wrote to Hermione. Her response came the next morning, tight and precise with the specific energy she had when a problem was engaging every part of her. Don't meet him alone. Don't meet him in a private space. If you meet him, it should be somewhere with witnesses, and you should have someone you trust with you, and you should set the agenda entirely yourself and give him nothing to work with in terms of timing or topic surprises. Then, in smaller writing, also I think you should meet him. I don't think you can do what you're doing without understanding him fully, and you can't understand him fully from documents. But be careful. Then, I'm coming back to London next week. My mum found a way to extend the trip. I want to be there. Harry appreciated this more than he knew how to say in writing, so he wrote, "Good. I'll need someone to tell me when I'm wrong." He sent a response to Dumbledore. "Dear Professor Dumbledore, I am willing to meet. The terms are as follows: the meeting takes place in a Gringotts private room, with a goblin witness present throughout. You will answer questions directly and completely. You will not attempt to use persuasion magic, legilimency, or any other form of magical influence. Ragnarok will verify compliance before and after. If these terms are acceptable, name a date." Harry Potter he folded it and sent it, and then went to meet Neville at Gringotts, because he had promised he would be there. Neville sat in the assessment room chair with his hands gripping the armrests and the expression of someone who had been told the test might hurt and was trying to be brave about it in the specific, slightly performative way children were brave when they needed someone to see them doing it. "It doesn't hurt," Harry told him. "It's warm. Like holding something that knows you." Neville looked at him. "Does that make sense?" "Not really," Harry admitted. "But it's the best description I have." Griphook placed Neville's hand on the stone with the professional efficiency of someone who had done this 3 times in the last fortnight and was beginning to treat Harry's introductions as a recurring phenomenon. The stone lit up. The quill moved. It moved for a long time. Harry watched Griphook's face this time, because he'd learned that Griphook's face was easier to read than Ragnarok's. The goblin's sharp eyes moved over the parchment as it filled, and what Harry saw there was not concern, it was the closely managed version of surprise. When it was done, Griphook handed the parchment to Ragnarok, who read it, and then did a thing Harry had not seen him do before. He sat back in his chair and was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Longbottom," Ragnarok said. "Your magical core is," he appeared to select his word carefully, "intact." "Intact," Neville repeated carefully. "My Gran thinks I might be a, no," Ragnarok said, with a directness that left no room for qualification. "You are not. Your magical core is robust and your bloodline is consistent with a long line of powerful witches and wizards." He paused. "However, the stone has detected a magical suppression on your core, not a memory charm, a different mechanism. A blocking spell, of significant age and craft, that has been interfering with the natural development of your magic." Neville went very still. Harry looked at Ragnarok. "Who cast it?" Ragnarok examined the parchment. The room was very quiet. "The signature is different from your own," he said to Harry. He looked at Neville. "The signature belongs to someone in your immediate family, Mr. Longbottom. A living person." Neville's knuckles went white on the armrests. Harry thought about Augusta Longbottom's iron composure, her absolute certainty about what was right and wrong, her 40 years of Wizengamot service and her clear-eyed management of everything that had happened to her family. He thought about someone who loved a child so completely they could convince themselves that controlling him was the same as protecting him. He thought about good intentions. Neville, he said carefully. Can I ask you something? Neville nodded. He looked like he was trying very hard not to be sick. Has there ever been a time when your magic came through strongly? Without thinking, without trying. Neville was quiet for a moment. The plants, he said, and his voice was rougher than usual. When I'm with plants, it works. Gran doesn't come into the greenhouse much. She says it's not a proper magical discipline. He stopped. Oh, he said, very quietly. It found the gap, Harry said. Your magic found the only place it wasn't being blocked and went there. Neville stared at the stone for a long time. His face was doing something complicated and honest that Harry looked away from slightly, because some things deserve privacy even in a room without it. Can it be removed? Neville asked Griphook. The blocking spell. Yes, Griphook said. It is simpler than the layered memory charms. One session should be sufficient. He paused with the particular Goblin brand of tact. You would need to inform your guardian. That's my grandmother. Yes. Griphook did not elaborate. Neville sat up straight. He put his shoulders back. It was a small movement that took visible effort, and it was the bravest thing Harry had seen him do, which was saying something given that he'd watched Neville hold himself together while hearing his parents' story described flatly by a stranger. Then I'll tell her, Neville said. And if she won't, I'll tell her I'm going to have it removed anyway. Harry looked at him. You sure? She loves me, Neville said. I know she does. But she does things because she's afraid. He picked at the dirt still under his thumbnail from his plant pot. I'm not going to be afraid anymore. Not of being a squib, not of Gran, not of anything. He looked at Harry. If you can walk around being the Emperor of Britain at 8 years old, I can tell my grandmother she put a blocking spell on my magic. Fair point, Harry said. Also, Neville's voice shifted slightly, like he was about to say something he'd been holding on to. If your court thing is real. What Hermione said. About the Emperor's court needing more than one person. He looked at Harry with the direct expression of someone who had decided to stop hedging. I want in. Harry met his gaze. He didn't qualify it or manage it or add conditions. You're in, he said. Neville nodded once. The matter was settled. Augusta Longbottom arrived at Gringotts 40 minutes later. Harry had not expected this. He had expected Neville to tell her later, from a safe distance, possibly by letter. But Neville had apparently sent a note with the Gringotts owl while Harry was confirming appointment details with Griphook, and the result was that Augusta Longbottom walked through the door of the assessment room with her vulture hat and her decisive hands and her face completely composed except for the very slightest tightening around her eyes. She looked at Neville first. He looked back at her. Something passed between them that Harry couldn't fully read because it was in the specific private language of people who had been navigating each other's grief for years. Then she looked at Ragnarok, who wordlessly handed her the assessment parchment. She read it. She stood with it in her hands for a long moment. Augusta, Ragnarok said. The blocking spell signature. He held her gaze. You know. I know, she said. Her voice was completely level. Harry thought about what it would cost to make your voice that level. Gran, Neville said, and his voice was gentler than Harry expected. Not angry. Just, there. She stopped. Started again, and the start was harder than any of Harry's interactions with her had been, because she was stripped of the composure that was her primary mode and there was just a person underneath it, aged and tired and having done something she had almost managed not to look at directly for 9 years. After what happened to your parents, I was afraid that you would be a target. That being powerful would make you visible. That being visible, her jaw was tight. It seemed like protection. It seemed like the right thing. Neville looked at the floor. Then back at her. It wasn't, he said. But I know you thought it was. It wasn't, Augusta said. Agreeing. Owning it. I will give my consent for the removal. Today. She set the parchment down on the table. And I am sorry, Neville. I am sorry for what I thought I was doing for you. Neville stood up and crossed the room and put his arms around his grandmother, who for a moment looked as if she wasn't quite sure what to do with this, and then held him back with a fierceness that said everything about how much she had been terrified of losing him. Harry looked at Ragnock. Ragnock looked at Harry. Neither of them said anything. Dumbledore's response to Harry's meeting terms arrived 3 days later. A single sentence, in that steady old hand. Terms accepted. I am available whenever you choose. Harry had half expected resistance. The absence of it told him something, that Dumbledore had made some internal decision, crossed some internal threshold, and the letter he'd sent had been genuine rather than strategic. That was simultaneously better and worse than the alternative. He looked at the letter for a long time. He wrote to Hermione. He accepted. I think he means it. I think that makes it more complicated, not less. Her response came at 2 a.m, which told him she'd been thinking about it and hadn't been able to sleep. Yes. It's always more complicated when people mean it. If he was just lying it would be simple. But I think he believed he was right, and I think he's starting to understand he wasn't, and that makes him neither villain nor ally, which is the hardest kind of person to deal with. A pause in the ink, then, but you can deal with it. I know you can. Harry folded the letter and put it in the pillowcase with the stone and the photograph. Outside, the Ministry owl was gone from the garden wall for the first time in 10 days. Something was about to shift. He could feel it the way you feel weather, not seeing the storm yet, just knowing it was coming from the quality of the air, the way everything went briefly still. He picked up his notes, his law books, and the Chapter 7 copy he'd made of the Emery's Court text, and he started to plan. Chapter 4, The Man in Azkaban. The file on Sirius Black was 3 inches thick. Ragnock had produced it without being asked, setting it on the table during their Wednesday meeting with the particular deliberateness of someone who had decided information was relevant and was choosing the moment to present it. Harry had opened it and read for 40 minutes straight without saying anything, while Ragnock worked through vault correspondence at his own desk with the comfortable indifference of someone accustomed to people needing silence to absorb large things. The file contained trial records, or more accurately the absence of trial records, which was itself the central problem. A Gringotts account summary showing the Black family vault, which was one of the oldest and largest in the bank and which had been frozen on Sirius Black's imprisonment without any formal vault seizing order ever being filed, a procedural impossibility that the bank had been quietly noting in its records for 11 years without anyone in the ministry apparently caring. A property summary showing 12 Grimmauld Place in London, technically still owned by the Black family and by succession rights partially owing to Sirius Black, who had never been legally stripped of his inheritance because stripping an inheritance required a trial and a trial had never happened. And at the back of the file, in a separate sleeve, a single sheet of parchment in Ragnock's handwriting that said, simply, Peter Pettigrew. Listed as deceased. No body recovered. Gringotts records show a vault access attempt at Gringotts Paris branch 17 months after declared death. Access denied due to insufficient identification. Vault remains active. Harry put this piece of parchment on the table between them when he'd finished reading. Pettigrew, he said. Yes, Ragnock said. He's alive. The Gringotts Paris record strongly suggests so. The ministry was informed of the access attempt at the time and declined to investigate. Ragnock's voice was completely neutral. A living Pettigrew significantly complicates the case against Sirius Black, given that the entire prosecution, such as it was, in the absence of a trial, rested on eyewitness accounts of Black murdering Pettigrew and 12 Muggles. The witnesses saw an explosion, Harry said, having read the account reports carefully. They saw Black laughing at a crater. They did not see Pettigrew die. No. Pettigrew was your parents' secret keeper. Harry stared at the parchment. He knew this, from the fragmented returning memories and from Ragnock's thorough briefing during their first week of work together. But knowing it and reading the implications of it coldly, in a file, were different experiences. Not Black. That's what the prosecution assumed, that Black was the secret keeper, but nobody apparently checked, because Black was never given a trial where evidence could be examined. He was taken directly from the scene to Azkaban, Ragnock said. On Bartemius Crouch Sr.'s personal authority. No trial. No hearing. No formal charges filed. Technically, under wizarding law, Sirius Black has never been convicted of anything. He paused. He has been imprisoned for 11 years without a conviction. The room was quiet. Harry thought about a man in Azkaban who had been there for 11 years for something he probably hadn't done, on the authority of people who had decided that a speedy resolution was preferable to a correct one. He thought about Fudge's letter with its 7 embedded persuasion enchantments. He thought about Dumbledore, who had been present at the post-Voldemort chaos and who had made choices in those early days that compounded and compounded. He thought about the fact that Sirius Black was his godfather. This was in the file too, a godfather registration, filed at Gringotts 3 weeks before Harry was born, in James Potter's handwriting, with the formal magical attestation that made it binding. Sirius Orion Black. Named explicitly. Another thing that had been buried under 52 layers of carefully managed forgetting. What would it take, Harry said, to force a trial? Ragnock had clearly been waiting for this question. 3 options, he said. 1. A petition to the Wizengamot signed by at least 5 sitting members, requesting a formal review of the imprisonment. This goes through Fudge's administration first, and the probability of it being buried before reaching a vote is approximately, very high. Next option. 2. An imperial writ. Now that the imperial claim is registered and pending confirmation, you have partial imperial authority, not full authority, that comes after the confirmation vote, but enough to issue a writ of inquiry that the ministry is legally obligated to respond to. The response can be delayed but not refused. This creates a public record that cannot be quietly made to disappear. How long can they delay? Under the Accord provisions, they must respond formally within 60 days. However, a formal response to a writ of inquiry is not the same as a trial. It opens the door, it does not guarantee what walks through it. Third option. The Gringotts standing, Ragnock said, and there was something in his voice, not quite satisfaction, but the particular quality of a person about to present the argument they've been building toward. Sirius Black's vault has been frozen without legal authority for 11 years. During that time, Gringotts has been legally managing the vault in trust, and the associated fees, interest, and administrative costs have compounded substantially. The bank has standing to file a civil claim against the ministry for unlawful property seizure, which is a separate process from the criminal case entirely and bypasses the Wizengamot. It goes before a different body, the Magical Property Tribunal, which is independent of ministry administration. The tribunal has the authority to compel a ministry review of the original imprisonment as part of establishing whether the seizure was lawful, because the seizure's legality depends entirely on whether there was a legitimate conviction. He paused. And the property tribunal cannot be influenced by Fudge's office or by Dumbledore's Wizengamot connections because it operates under the Gringotts Ministry Accord of 1867, which grants it complete procedural independence. Harry looked at him. You've been building this case for a while. We've been waiting for someone with standing to act on it, Ragnock said. How long have you been waiting? 11 years, Ragnock said simply. The unlawful vault seizure was apparent within 6 months of the imprisonment. We have been noting it in our records and waiting for someone to ask. Harry thought about the particular patience of institutions that operated on a longer timeline than individual lives, the specific strategic power of waiting for the right moment rather than forcing the wrong one. He thought Ragnock would have made an extraordinary general. File all 3, Harry said. Ragnock nodded. Simultaneously? Yes. The imperial writ, the property tribunal claim, and, he thought about Augusta's 2 Wizengamot seats and who else might sign a petition. Can you get me a list of current Wizengamot members who have historically opposed Crouch's post-war detention policies? The ones who said at the time that trials should have been held. I can have it by tomorrow morning. Then we file Thursday, Harry said. Before Dumbledore can respond to the meeting request and before Fudge has time to anticipate the approach. Ragnarok looked at him with the particular amber-eyed attention that Harry had come to read as his version of genuine interest. There is also, he said, the question of Pettigrew. I know. Harry had been thinking about this since he'd first read the Vault Access report. If we can confirm he's alive, the case against Black collapses entirely. But finding him is a different kind of problem. It is, Ragnarok agreed. However, there is another Gringotts record that may be relevant. He slid a second piece of parchment across the table. A Gringotts London Vault Access attempt. 3 months ago. Again insufficient identification, this time because the vault holder is listed as deceased and the system flagged the discrepancy. The vault is registered under a different name, a pet registration, originally, which is unusual but not unprecedented for animagi who maintain secondary lives. He held Harry's gaze. Animagus registration was a legal requirement from 1750 onward. Peter Pettigrew is not on the registered Animagus list. Harry felt something click into place. The specific sensation of pieces aligning that had been waiting in separate parts of his mind for days. He's an unregistered Animagus, he said. That's how he survived. He transformed and ran. He thought about the eyewitness accounts he'd read, the explosion, Black laughing, a crater, and rearranged them with this new variable. A rat-sized hole in the narrative. Literally. He's been living as a rat somewhere. Somewhere in Britain, it appears, since he tried to access his vault in London recently. We need that information in the property tribunal filing, Harry said. It's not proof of life in the judicial sense, but it establishes reasonable doubt about the prosecution's core assumption in a way that an independent tribunal will have to address. It is already drafted into the filing, Ragnarok said. Harry almost smiled. You knew I'd get here. I thought you'd get here faster, actually. Ragnarok's expression remained composed, but there was something in it. I revised my estimate after the first session with Griphook. You were coherent within 20 minutes. Most people need several hours. I told you I process things later. You did. I found that tends to be accurate. Thursday came. The filings went in simultaneously at 9 in the morning, the imperial writ delivered to the ministry by Gringotts official courier, the property tribunal claim filed electronically in the tribunal's records, and the Wisengamot petition, signed by Augusta Longbottom, Griselda Marchbanks who Augusta had delivered with brisk efficiency, a wizard named Tiberius Ogden who had apparently needed approximately 4 minutes to read the summary document before signing, and 2 others from Augusta's network who Harry had not yet met, sent via formal magical post to every sitting Wisengamot member simultaneously. By 11 o'clock, 3 more members had signed the petition. By 1 o'clock, Cornelius Fudge's office had sent 4 increasingly agitated owls to Gringotts, none of which Ragnarok acknowledged. At 2:30, a memo arrived from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement stating that the ministry was reviewing the property tribunal filing and would issue a statement within 30 days. At 3, Hermione arrived at Gringotts. She was out of breath from hurrying, her hair doing something dramatic in the wind, with 2 books under one arm and her notebook already open in her hand. I got your letter, she said, stopping in front of Harry in the entrance hall. You filed all 3 at once? Yes. On the same day? Yes. She stared at him. They won't know which front to respond to first. That's the idea. She closed her notebook, which meant she was about to say something that wasn't a research note. How are you doing? Personally. With all of this. The Godfather part. Harry looked at her. She asked the questions most people skated past, and she asked them directly without making them comfortable or uncomfortable, just present. He appreciated it. He still didn't always know what to do with it. I'm processing it later, he said. She looked at him with the particular expression that meant she accepted this as a legitimate answer and would remember to ask again. "All right," she said. "What do you need right now?" "Come and meet Ragnak," he said. "I want you in the strategy room when we go through the response scenarios." She fell into step beside him with the immediate ease of someone who had accepted that this was where she was going to be, and they walked through the bank corridor together while Harry brought her up to speed on the Pettigrew development, and she interjected twice with points he'd missed, and he incorporated both without comment, and by the time they reached Ragnak's office the plan had two improvements it hadn't had before. Fudge came to Gringotts on Friday. Nobody had invited him. He arrived with two ministry officials who stood slightly behind him with the specific posture of people trying to be authoritative while knowing they were in a building where they had no institutional leverage whatsoever. Fudge himself was shorter than Harry had expected, round-faced and soft-looking in his lime-green bowler hat, with the practiced pleasantness of a man whose primary political skill was being inoffensive until the moment he needed to be something else. He was shown into a meeting room. Harry and Ragnak were already there. Hermione, at Harry's suggestion, was in the adjacent room with a Gringotts truth monitoring device running, not because they thought Fudge would say anything legally actionable but because having a record was a habit worth maintaining. Fudge looked at Harry with an expression that moved through several phases: surprise at the reality of him, a recalibration toward the pleasant approach he'd clearly planned, and then a further recalibration when Harry simply looked back at him and waited, without filling the silence or offering anything socially lubricating. "Harry," Fudge said, which was a mistake, using the first name without invitation, establishing a false intimacy. Harry noted it without responding to it. "It's wonderful to finally meet you. I have to say, for a young man of 8, you've made quite an entrance onto the wizarding stage." "Yes," Harry said. "These filings, obviously we're looking into everything, there are procedures, you understand, it's not that the ministry doubts." He stopped. The pleasant approach was not finding purchase. "I wanted to speak to you directly. Man to man. About what you're hoping to achieve." "I'm not a man," Harry said. "I'm 8. But I appreciate the rhetorical gesture." One of the ministry officials behind Fudge made a sound that might have been suppressed laughter and converted it poorly into a cough. Ragnak remained stone-faced. Fudge pressed on with the resilience of a politician who had survived many worse conversations. "The imperial claim is, look, nobody doubts your bloodline, Harry, truly. The Gringotts assessment is quite thorough, we know that. But the practical question of what an imperial title means in the context of modern wizarding governance is, I have the full legal brief if you'd like to review it," Harry said. "The Imperial Compact supersedes the Ministry's provisional charter by approximately 1,000 years. The question of what it means in practice is answered comprehensively in sections 3 through 7. He paused. "The short version is that it means what it has always meant. The Wisingamot advises and legislates. The Emperor has override authority in matters of law, rights, and fundamental compact. The two functions are complementary, not in conflict, unless the ministry decides to make them in conflict, at which point the conflict will not resolve in the ministry's favor." Fudge stared at him. "The more immediate question," Harry continued, before Fudge could recover, "is Sirius Black. He has been imprisoned for 11 years without trial. This is indefensible under magical law regardless of any other consideration, and the property tribunal filing establishes that Gringotts has independent standing to force a review. This will happen. The only question is whether it happens with the ministry's cooperation, which makes the ministry look appropriately corrective of a historical error, or without it, which makes the ministry look like it actively obstructs the correction of wrongful imprisonment." He held Fudge's gaze. "Which version would you prefer?" The room was very quiet. Fudge's pleasantness had eroded down to something underneath it, which was not malice but calculation, the deep, reflexive political calculation of a man for whom every situation was primarily a question of what it cost him personally. Harry watched it happen and waited. "The ministry," Fudge said, slowly, "would want to ensure any review process was conducted with appropriate, Cornelius." It was the first time Harry had used his name, and he'd chosen it deliberately, not as false familiarity but as a signal that the diplomatic cushioning was over. Sirius Black is my godfather. He has been in Azkaban for 11 years for something I believe he did not do, and the evidence for this belief is now filed with an independent tribunal. The Ministry's options are to cooperate with a review or to oppose it. If you oppose it, the imperial writ means I can compel a response, and that response becomes public record regardless of outcome. He paused. Cooperate. It is genuinely the better choice. Fudge looked at him for a long time. I'll have my office look into the original case documentation, he said finally. Not a yes. Not a refusal. The noncommittal holding position of a man buying time. Good, Harry said. I look forward to the Ministry's formal response to the Property Tribunal within 30 days. After Fudge left, Ragnarok sat back in his chair with the expression of someone who had witnessed something worth noting. He will go to Dumbledore tonight, he said. I know, Harry said. Good. Hermione came in from the adjacent room with her notebook. He cast a subtle truth-revealing hex on the table when he sat down, she said, checking her monitoring record. Standard Ministry interrogation preparation. He was hoping to catch you in a contradiction. Harry had felt it, a faint warmth in the table surface, similar to the stone but much less sophisticated. He had simply not contradicted himself. Anything else? He was genuinely surprised, she said. He wasn't performing it. I don't think he expected you to have this level of, she paused, selecting the word, architecture. Good, Harry said again. She sat down and opened her notebook to a fresh page. Right. Now that Fudge is processing that, we need to think about the Wisengamot confirmation vote. Augusta said the earliest possible date for a formal sitting is 6 weeks away. We have 6 weeks to secure enough votes that the confirmation passes comfortably, not barely, because barely invites an immediate challenge on procedural grounds. It needs to be unambiguous. 26 seats minimum, Harry said. 34 for a supermajority. We have, currently, 6 confirmed signatures on the petition. Augusta's 2 seats. Several independents who signed the petition, which is not a commitment to the confirmation vote but is a signal of openness. She was moving through her notes quickly, with the efficiency of someone who'd been doing the math since the petition went in. Dumbledore's block is 22. Fudge's is 15. But Fudge's block is loyalty by convenience, most of them will go whichever way looks safer. If the confirmation starts to look inevitable, at least half of them shift. So we need to make it look inevitable, Harry said. We need to make it be inevitable, she corrected, with a slight emphasis that was its own argument. Looking inevitable and being inevitable are the same thing in politics until suddenly they're not. Ragnarok inclined his head slightly, which was his version of a nod of agreement. Harry looked at his list. Tiberius Ogden was signed and likely confirmable. Griselda Marchbanks was Augusta's delivery. There were 3 others whose positions were movable. He needed the independents, the ones who voted on argument alone. I need to speak to them directly, he said. Each one. Yes, Hermione agreed. And you need to do it before Dumbledore does. Set up the meetings, Harry said to Ragnarok. Whatever you can arrange in the next 2 weeks, through formal house correspondence. I'll attend every single one. There are 11 independent members, Ragnarok said. Then 11 meetings. He looked at the list. Starting with whoever Dumbledore is most likely to approach first. The meeting with Dumbledore happened on a Wednesday, 10 days after the filings, in a private Gringotts room with Ragnarok as witness and Hermione in the adjacent monitoring room because Harry wanted someone he trusted reading the record in real time. He arrived first. He was always going to arrive first, it was his meeting, his terms, his room. He sat at the head of the table because the head of the table was where you sat when the room was yours and you knew it. Dumbledore arrived exactly on time, which Harry noted as the professional courtesy of a man who understood punctuality as a form of respect and had chosen to offer it. He was taller than Harry had expected from the returning memory fragments, imposing in the specific way that very old, very powerful things were imposing, with the weight of their own history making the air around them slightly denser. Silver hair, half-moon glasses, robes of deep blue. He looked, at first glance, exactly like the most trusted wizard in the world looked. He sat down and looked at Harry. And Harry looked back at him with the particular stillness that was not performed calm but actual calm, the calm of someone who had been preparing for exactly this for 2.5 weeks and had run through every version of it in their head and knew precisely who they were and what they were doing. "Harry," Dumbledore said. "Professor Dumbledore," Harry said. Not Harry. The name was not his to use here. Something moved briefly in Dumbledore's eyes, not hurt, exactly. Something adjacent to it. "Of course," he said. He placed his hands on the table, visible, which was a deliberate signal and Harry credited him for it. "I said in my letter that I owe you explanations. I meant it. I would like to begin there, if you'll allow it." "Go ahead," Harry said. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment in the way very old people were sometimes quiet, gathering something, organizing something, applying a last coat of honesty to what he was about to say. "After your parents died," he began, "I was terrified. Not of Voldemort, he was gone, we thought perhaps permanently. I was terrified of you." He held Harry's gaze. "Of what you were. Of what the compacts and the lineage meant. Of the power in you that I could already see at 18 months old, that was evident even to a non-diagnostic eye." He paused. "I had watched power destroy the wizarding world twice in my lifetime. I had watched brilliant, powerful people, people I loved, become instruments of destruction. I had watched Gellert." He stopped. "A private pain, briefly visible and then put away. I had watched what power did to people who were not prepared for it. And I looked at you, 18 months old, the most magically potent infant I had encountered in 60 years of education, with a destiny that would make you a target from birth, and I thought, if he grows up knowing what he is, he will be shaped by it. He will be formed by expectation and prophecy and power before he has the chance to be a person." Harry said nothing. "So I decided," Dumbledore continued, and his voice was level but the levelness was costing him something, "to give you a normal childhood. A quiet life. Time to be ordinary before the world required you to be extraordinary." He looked at Harry. "The memory charms were intended to be temporary. Reversible on your 11th birthday, when you came to Hogwarts, when I could be present to guide the process." 52, Harry said. "Yes. Over 6 years. Yes." Harry leaned forward slightly. "The first charm was cast when I was 20 months old," he said. 2 months after my parents died. At my aunt's house." He let the silence sit for a moment. "You went to a grieving orphan's house 2 months after his parents were murdered and modified his memory." "Repeatedly. For 6 years." Dumbledore did not look away. Whatever else he was or wasn't, he did not look away. "Yes," he said. "I did. You told yourself it was protection. I told myself many things." Dumbledore's voice was quieter now. "Most of them were even true, in their way. The intention was genuine. The problem," he stopped. "The problem is that genuine intention does not absolve method. I chose my method because it was efficient and because I was certain I was right, and those two things together are perhaps the most dangerous combination available to a person with my kind of power." He paused. "I have been certain I was right about many things over a very long life, Harry. I have been wrong enough times to know that certainty is not a reliable guide." The room was very quiet. "Sirius Black," Harry said. "Yes. You were certain he was guilty." Dumbledore was quiet. "I was told, the scene, the witnesses, the context. Sirius had been behaving strangely in the weeks before your parents' deaths. I was, yes. I believed he was guilty. I did not question the imprisonment because I did not think there was a question to ask." He paused. That was wrong. I should have insisted on a trial. I should have questioned what I'd been told rather than what I'd assumed. Sirius deserved a trial. He deserved, his voice shifted in a way that was difficult to categorize, something between grief and guilt. He deserved better than I gave him. Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about what Hermione had written. He believed he was right, and he's starting to understand he wasn't, and that makes him neither villain nor ally, which is the hardest kind of person to deal with. I'm going to free him, Harry said. The property tribunal filing will force a trial review. I need that process to be clean. I cannot have you working against it, quietly or openly. I won't, Dumbledore said. That's not enough. Harry kept his voice even. I need you to actively support it. Public statement, if necessary. If your credibility is as significant as everyone seems to think it is, then apply it here. Sirius Black, having the most trusted wizard in Britain, publicly acknowledged that his imprisonment was a miscarriage of justice, will make it substantially harder for the Ministry to slow-walk the review. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. You're asking me to publicly acknowledge that I made a catastrophic error? Yes, Harry said. I am. The silence stretched. Harry did not fill it. All right, Dumbledore said. I'll draft a statement. I'd like to review it before it's released, Harry said. Not to control your words. To make sure it doesn't accidentally serve any purpose other than the one we need it to serve. Something moved across Dumbledore's face, surprise, Harry thought, or something close to it. The surprise of being asked for something and finding the ask reasonable rather than punitive. Yes, he said. That's fair. The Imperial confirmation vote, Harry said. Dumbledore looked at him. You have 22 votes in your block, Harry said. Most of them follow you because they trust you. If you oppose the confirmation, even procedurally, even through abstention, it signals your block to oppose it, and it becomes a genuine fight. He held Dumbledore's gaze. I will win it regardless. But winning it as a fight does more damage to the institution than winning it as a consensus. I'd rather it be a consensus. You're asking me to support your claim, Dumbledore said slowly. I'm asking you to not oppose it, Harry said. There's a difference. Support it if you believe in it. Abstain if you can't bring yourself to support it. But don't oppose it and don't deploy your block against it. Dumbledore looked at the table for a moment. You have thought about this very carefully, he said. I've had 2.5 weeks, Harry said. You are, Dumbledore stopped. You are very different from what I was trying to produce, he said, and his voice was quiet and honest. I was trying to create a humble, ordinary child who would grow into someone who could sacrifice himself for a greater good without hesitation. And instead you are, this. He seemed to search for a word. Yourself, he said. Entirely yourself. Despite everything I did to prevent it. He paused. I'm not sure whether that is a rebuke or something I ought to be relieved about. I think it's both, Harry said. The honesty of it stopped whatever Dumbledore had been about to say next. He sat with it for a moment. I will abstain on the confirmation vote, he said. And I will speak to my block. I cannot guarantee they follow, they are independent people, but I can tell them what I actually believe, which is that the claim is legitimate and the evidence is sound, and that opposing it is opposing an unambiguous legal precedent for political convenience. He held Harry's gaze. And I believe that is what opposing it would be. Harry studied him. He had come into this room prepared for every version of this conversation, and he had run through the scenarios where Dumbledore was strategic, and sincere, and partially both, and completely neither. He had assigned rough probabilities to each version. He had told himself to not be moved by whatever the man said, to evaluate it on its merits and make decisions accordingly. He found that this was harder than he'd expected, not because Dumbledore was manipulative, he wasn't being manipulative, that was the thing, but because the conversation had the uncomfortable quality of being real. The man sitting across from him was not a villain and was not an ally and was not performing anything. He was just a very old, very intelligent person who had done something terrible for reasons he had genuinely believed were good, and was sitting in the consequences of it, and choosing to not make them worse. Harry didn't forgive him. He wasn't at that part yet, and might not get there, and that was fine. But he made a decision. "There's a prophecy," he said. "I know there is. It's part of what you were doing, managing me toward it." He watched Dumbledore's expression carefully. "I'm not going to ask you to tell me what it says. Not today. But I need you to understand that if there's a threat, something coming, something that was behind my parents' deaths and behind Voldemort and behind whatever you were preparing me for, I will deal with it. On my own terms. Not yours." He paused. "I'm not the weapon you were building. But I'm not uninterested in what the weapon was for." Dumbledore was very still. "When you're ready to tell me," Harry said, "I'll listen. But not today and not on your timeline." "All right," Dumbledore said, very quietly. Harry stood. The meeting was over when he ended it. The draft statement on Sirius. "Send it to Gringotts within the week. You'll have it by Friday," Dumbledore said. Harry nodded once. He walked to the door. "Harry." Dumbledore's voice stopped him, not because it was commanding but because it wasn't. It was just a man's voice, without the authority or the deliberate management, just the register of someone who has something to say and is uncertain of its welcome. "I did," he stopped. "For what it is worth. I never stopped caring whether you were safe. That much was not a calculation." Harry stood with his hand on the door. "I know," he said. He didn't turn around. "That's what makes it complicated." He walked out. In the adjacent room, Hermione had stopped writing 20 minutes in and had been listening with her pen cap in her mouth, which she did when she was thinking about something that didn't resolve neatly into notes. She looked at Harry when he came in. "Well," she said. "Well," Harry agreed. She studied his face. "Are you all right?" He thought about it seriously rather than reflexively. "I think so," he said. "I'll tell you in an hour. I might be processing." She nodded. "He meant it," she said. "All of it." The monitoring showed no deception indicators anywhere in there. She paused. "I didn't expect that." "Neither did I," Harry admitted. "Completely." She picked up her pen. "Sirius Black's review. If Dumbledore releases a public statement and the property tribunal starts moving, what's the fastest realistic timeline to an actual trial? Ragnarok thinks 6 weeks. Possibly 4 if the tribunal fast-tracks it, which they can do on imperial writ authority." Harry sat down. "He's been there 11 years, Hermione." She looked at him, and for a moment didn't say anything analytical or strategic. "I know," she said, quietly. "We're going to get him out." "Yes," Harry said. "We are." She opened her notebook. "Right. The confirmation vote is in 5 weeks. We have 9 independent members still to meet. I've mapped their historical voting patterns and there are 4 who've consistently voted on principle over politics. They'll want a real conversation, not a presentation." She slid the analysis across to him. "I think you should meet each of them in person, in their preferred settings, not Gringotts, somewhere they're comfortable. It signals confidence rather than need for institutional backing." "Agreed," Harry said. "And Neville," she said. "How is he?" Harry thought about Neville in the assessment room saying "I'm not going to be afraid anymore." "Better," he said. "Griphook removed the blocking spell yesterday. Augusta was there." He paused. "Apparently he made 3 plants bloom simultaneously the moment it came off, without doing anything deliberately. Just, standing there, and they bloomed." Hermione smiled, not the sharp one but the warm one she kept less visible. "Good," she said. "He's going to be remarkable." "He already is," Harry said. "He just didn't know it yet." She looked at him with that look she had, the one that meant she was noting something. "You're quite good at that," she said. "At what?" "Seeing what people are before they see it themselves." Harry looked at the notebook, at the analysis of voting patterns and the meeting schedule and the careful architecture of the weeks ahead. He thought about his godfather in Azkaban and Neville's plants blooming and Dumbledore's quiet, unperformed that much was not a calculation, and the weight of 52 still being lifted layer by careful layer. "I had a good reason to learn," he said. Outside, through the high windows of the Gringotts corridor, the afternoon had gone to early evening, and the lights in Diagon Alley were coming on one by one, and the city was doing the things cities do in the early dark, which is to feel like everything is possible that hasn't happened yet. Hermione turned a fresh page in her notebook. They got back to work. Chapter 5, The Weight of the Crown. The formal sitting of the Wisengamot was called for a Tuesday. The notification went out 11 days before the date, which was the minimum required under standing orders, and the official agenda listed 3 items: a routine budget review for the Department of Magical Transportation, an amendment to the Beast Classification Register, and, third, the confirmation hearing for the imperial claim filed by Harry James Potter under the Compact of 832. Third on the agenda. After the budget review and the Beast Classification. Harry read the agenda notification at Gringotts and looked at Ragnarok. They put it third. "Yes," Ragnarok said. "That's deliberate." "Everything about a Wisengamot agenda is deliberate," Ragnarok said. "Third position means the first 2 items consume time and attention, the chamber is tired and restless, and the claimant has been waiting in an anteroom for potentially 2 hours projecting whatever image that waiting creates." He paused. "It is a technique for managing the psychological presentation of a proceeding." "Who controls the agenda?" "The Chief Warlock. Currently Dumbledore." Harry set the notification down. He agreed to abstain. He didn't agree to make it easy. No, Ragnarok agreed. He did not. Harry thought about this. The abstention was real, he believed Dumbledore had meant it, and Hermione's monitoring had confirmed no deception in the meeting. But there was a considerable distance between not opposing something and actively making it go smoothly, and Dumbledore was apparently going to occupy that distance with a certain precision. "Can the agenda be amended?" Harry asked. "By a motion from the floor, seconded by at least 3 members, passed by simple majority. The motion must be raised at the opening of the sitting before any business is conducted." Ragnarok's expression remained composed. "You would need someone in the chamber to raise it." "Augusta," Harry said. "She will be ready," Ragnarok confirmed. "She anticipated this." Harry nodded. "What else?" "The chamber," Ragnarok said. "I think you should see it before the day." The Wisengamot chamber was underground, reached by a series of descending corridors from the ministry's main atrium, and it was larger than Harry had expected and older feeling than everything above it. The stone was different, darker and closer grained, the kind of stone that had been there since before the building above it and would be there after. The seats rose in tiered semicircles around a central floor, each seat marked with the crest of its house or its current holder's name, 50 seats in total, and at the head, elevated on a dais, the Chief Warlock's chair with the scales of justice carved above it. Harry stood in the center of the floor and looked at it. The seats were empty. The chamber was lit by torches that burned with a steady magical flame that didn't flicker. The acoustics were perfect, he could hear his own breathing with unnatural clarity, and the slight echo made even a quiet sound feel consequential. He turned slowly, reading the crests. The Potter seats, 2 of them, on the right tier, marked with the stag and shield. The Longbottom seats below them. Further round, the Peveril seat which was currently listed as vacant, waiting to be activated. And on the highest tier, the 12 Imperial seats, blank-faced, unmarked except for the Imperial crest, the scales and sword of the Emrys Compact, that had been sitting empty for 183 years. 12 seats with nobody in them for nearly 2 centuries. He stood in the middle of the floor and felt the weight of it, not as pressure but as depth. The way standing in a very old place feels different from standing in a new one, because the old place has had time to accumulate the specific gravity of everything that ever happened in it. They'll stare, Hermione said from behind him. She had come in quietly, which was a skill she had, and was standing at the edge of the floor with her arms crossed and her notebook tucked under one elbow. When you walk in. All 50 of them. I know, Harry said. Some of them are going to be genuinely hostile. Dumbledore's block abstaining doesn't mean they're happy about it. And Fudge's people are going to be watching to see if it's safe to commit or safer to stay ambiguous. I know that too. She walked out onto the floor and stood beside him, looking up at the seats. What are you thinking? I'm thinking about what it's for, Harry said. Not the title. The institution. All of this. He looked at the empty Imperial seats. It was built for something. The compact was written for a reason. Someone looked at the wizarding world and thought, this needs a structure, it needs something that can hold when everything else fails. He paused. And then it sat empty for 183 years and the ministry pretended it didn't exist. And what do you think it's for? Hermione asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. He thought about it seriously. Protection, he said. Not the Dumbledore kind, not managing people for their own good. The actual kind. Making sure people have rights that can't be voted away by whoever's in power at the moment. He thought about Neville's blocking spell and Sirius in Azkaban and the gaps in the Ministry's post-war records. Making sure what happened to Sirius can't just happen. Making sure what happened to me and Neville and everyone else who got managed and arranged by people who were certain they knew best, making sure there's something those people have to answer to. Hermione was quiet for a moment. That's not a small thing, she said. No, Harry said. It's not. He looked around the chamber one more time, fixing it in his mind, not nervously, but the way you fix a terrain in your mind before you have to navigate it. I'll be ready on Tuesday. I know you will, she said. I just wanted you to have today to stand here first. He looked at her. She was watching the empty seats with the expression she had when she was thinking about something larger than the immediate problem, which was how he knew she understood what he was doing and what it was going to cost and had already decided she was here for all of it. Thank you, he said. For everything. The research and the monitoring and the notes at 2 in the morning. The notes at 2 in the morning are purely self-interested, she said, with the Hermione Granger version of deflection, which meant she acknowledged the thanks by redirecting to something practical. I find it very difficult to sleep when there's an interesting problem running, and your situation is quite an interesting problem. She paused and added, quieter, also you're my friend. So. Yes, Harry said. I know. He looked at the chamber one more time. Come on. Ragnarok has the final member meeting set for this afternoon. The last 3 independents are coming together. Together? She was already moving. Whose idea was that? Theirs, apparently. They talked to each other and decided they had the same questions and preferred a joint conversation to 3 separate ones. He walked with her toward the corridor. I think it's good, actually. It means whatever they decide, they'll have decided it together, and they'll be consistent. Or it means if one of them is skeptical it spreads to the others. Only if my argument doesn't hold up. She gave him a sideways look. It holds up. I know, he said. I just like hearing you confirm it. She made a sound that was her version of exasperated affection, which was a sound he'd learned to identify and enjoyed enormously, and they walked out of the chamber and up through the ministry corridors and out into the London afternoon, where the sky was doing something complicated with clouds and the city was going about its business entirely unaware that in 11 days the shape of magical Britain was going to change. The 3 independent Wisengamot members were, Edmund Rosier, who was not the Rosier of the Death Eater family but a distant cousin who had spent his life being precise about that distinction, Millicent Bagnold, who had been Minister for Magic before Fudge and had retired to her Wisengamot seat with the relieved energy of someone returned to their preferred form of work, and a wizard named Caractacus Burke who was old enough that most people had stopped tracking his opinions, which he apparently found both insulting and convenient. They met in a private dining room at the Leaky Cauldron, which was Bagnall's suggestion, and they were already seated when Harry arrived. He was 8 minutes early, which meant they had been there longer than that, which was their own version of the same strategy. He sat down. He ordered tea. He waited for whoever was going to open the conversation. It was Burke who spoke first, which Harry had expected based on Ragnar's profile, the oldest, the most independent, the one with the least to lose and therefore the one who would just say the thing. "You're very small," Burke said. "I've been told," Harry said. "The compact has no age requirement," Bagnall said, in the tone of someone who had already had this argument with her own internal skepticism and resolved it. "I've reread it 3 times this week. Believe me, I was looking for one." "It would have been simpler if there were one," Rosier said. He had the manner of a man who was professionally cautious, the kind of caution that came not from timidity but from having learned the cost of incaution. He looked at Harry steadily. "We have questions." "Ask them," Harry said. "The memory charms," Rosier said. "Gringotts attested them. 52, 1 Castor, Dumbledore's signature. I want to understand what you intend to do with that information in terms of formal proceedings." "The Grand Magical Larceny complaint is filed," Harry said. "It is independent of the confirmation vote. I'm not asking you to vote on whether what Dumbledore did was criminal, that's a separate matter for the appropriate process. What I'm asking you to confirm is the bloodline claim and the compact activation, both of which stand on their own merits regardless of what was done to me." Rosier considered this. "You're separating the legal from the personal." "They are separate," Harry said. "I am personally angry about what was done to me. That's not relevant to whether the compact is valid." "How do we know," Burke said, with the directness of the very old, "that you're not going to use imperial authority as a personal weapon? You're 8 years old and you've just found out that the most respected wizard alive spent 6 years modifying your memory. That's enough to make anyone want to burn something down." "Yes," Harry said simply. The word stopped whatever Burke had been building toward. He blinked. "Yes, it's enough to make anyone want to burn something down," Harry repeated. "I am angry. I expect to be angry about it for a long time. The question you're actually asking is whether I'll let the anger drive my decisions." He looked at Burke steadily. "The way I see it, the answer to that question is in what I've done over the last 4 weeks. I haven't moved against Dumbledore personally. I've filed a complaint through the proper process and I've met with him directly and I've asked him to do specific, useful things with whatever credibility he has left. If I wanted to burn something down, I've had the resources to do it since the first week." He paused. "I want a functional institution. That requires people I disagree with, people who made mistakes, people I'm angry at. All of them are going to be in that chamber on Tuesday. I need to be able to work with them." Bagnall was looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read, something that was assessment layered over something older, more personal. "When I was minister," she said, "there were things I knew were wrong that I let continue because changing them was too difficult and the timing was never right." She didn't elaborate on what things. "It is a particular kind of cowardice that only becomes visible in retrospect. I would prefer not to repeat it." She paused. "I'll support the confirmation." Rosier nodded. "As will I, conditional on the Sirius Black review proceeding without ministry interference. I want that on the record as a condition." "It's already on record via the Property Tribunal filing," Harry said. "The review proceeds regardless of this vote. Your condition is already met." Rosier looked slightly surprised, then not. Then yes. They all looked at Burke. Burke was looking at Harry with the particular quality of attention of someone who was doing something more than evaluating a political decision. He was looking at him the way people sometimes looked at something and saw in it something they hadn't seen in a long time and hadn't expected to see again. "My wife," Burke said, "voted for the last Emery's Emperor's confirmation. 1843, she was young then, barely of age. She said the vote was the proudest moment of her political life. He paused. She's been dead for 30 years. I've held my seat this long because leaving it felt like leaving something she believed in, though I couldn't always articulate what. He picked up his tea, which had gone cold, and drank it anyway with the indifference of someone who had stopped noticing temperature decades ago. Yes, he said. I'll vote for confirmation. Harry looked around the table. Thank you, he said. All three of you. He said it without flourish, just clearly, with the weight that genuine gratitude had when it was offered without performance. They talked for another hour about specifics, the order of proceedings, who would second Augusta's motion to move the imperial claim from third to first on the agenda, the exact language of the confirmation motion. Burke turned out to have an extensive knowledge of Wisengamot procedural history and had opinions about all of it, and Bagnold had a sharp practical intelligence about what could go wrong and how to prevent it, and Rosier asked the kind of careful, precise questions that stress-tested assumptions, and by the time Harry left he had, in addition to 3 more votes, a comprehensive procedural rehearsal of Tuesday's sitting that identified 6 potential obstruction moves and had a prepared response to each. He walked back to Gringotts and wrote it all down before he forgot anything, and then sent a summary to Hermione, who responded within 20 minutes with 2 additional obstruction scenarios he hadn't covered and the appropriate responses to both. He was beginning to understand that the 2 of them together were considerably more than the sum of their parts, which was something he thought was worth noting. 3 days before the sitting, Dumbledore's statement on Sirius Black appeared in the Daily Prophet. It occupied the front page, beneath a headline that the Prophet had clearly struggled to make work. Dumbledore calls for review of Black imprisonment, a grave error of justice. It ran to 4 paragraphs, which was longer than it needed to be and shorter than the subject deserved, but it was unambiguous. Dumbledore stated directly that in the chaos following Voldemort's fall he had failed to ensure proper trial procedure for Sirius Black, that the evidence as he now understood it warranted significant doubt about Black's guilt, and that he supported a full independent review of the original case with complete access to all relevant records. He did not specifically mention Pettigrew's name, because Harry had asked him not to. Pettigrew as a variable was better held in reserve, surfaced at the trial itself where it could do maximum damage to the prosecution's case rather than tipped off in advance. The Prophet also ran, on page 3, a considerably shorter piece about the upcoming Wisengamot sitting and the Imperial confirmation hearing. The tone was carefully ambiguous, the sort of journalism that described facts without quite committing to a position on them, which told Harry that the Prophet's editor had decided to wait and see which way the wind was going before leaning in a direction. Fudge's office released a statement saying the ministry welcomed Dumbledore's call for a review and was committed to ensuring justice was served, which was the statement of a man who had received Dumbledore's public position as a fait accompli and had decided that being on the same side of it was better than being seen to resist it. Harry read all of it over breakfast at the Dursleys, which was the first time in 4 weeks he'd eaten in the Dursley kitchen with any attention, having been largely elsewhere or preoccupied. Petunia had stopped making comments. Vernon had stopped making the specific noise he made when something displeased him and he wanted to make sure everyone knew it. The house had settled into a kind of careful neutrality that Harry suspected had less to do with acceptance and more to do with the accumulating evidence that the world Harry was connected to was considerably larger and more serious than anything they could effectively oppose. He thought about them sometimes, about what it would mean to address what had been done to him there. The neglect and the cupboard and the particular grinding smallness of a childhood spent being made to feel like an imposition. He thought about whether there were things that needed to be said or done or filed. He had decided, for now, to leave it. Not from forgiveness, he wasn't there either, but from the practical understanding that there was a limit to how many fronts he could hold at once, and the Dursleys were a small front. A personal one. It could wait until he had more capacity to deal with it properly. Some things needed to be done right more than they needed to be done fast. He folded the Prophet and went to get ready for Tuesday. On Monday evening, Neville came to Gringotts. He had come by himself, no Augusta, just Neville in his outdoor robes with a small pot tucked under his arm, which Harry had come to recognize as his version of bringing a comfort object to a significant event. He found Harry in the records room where he and Hermione had been working through the confirmation motion language for the final time, and he sat down across from them with the manner of someone who had something prepared to say. "I want to be there," Neville said. "Tomorrow. In the chamber." "You're not a Wisengamot member," Hermione said, not unkindly, looking up from her notes. "I know. But the public gallery is open for confirmation hearings. I checked." He looked at Harry. "I want to be there." Harry looked at him. In the 3 weeks since Griphook had removed the blocking spell, Neville had changed in the specific way that things change when something that was constraining them is removed, not dramatically, not overnight, but in the accumulation of small moments where he had done something he would previously have hesitated on and hadn't hesitated. He asked questions in the direct, slightly blunt way that turned out to be his natural mode. He'd turned up at Gringotts twice with research notes on Wisengamot history that Hermione had rated as genuinely useful. He had apparently told Augusta about the blocking spell with complete calm, and Augusta had cried, which Neville had reported with the complicated tenderness of someone processing a large thing carefully. He had also, at last count, caused 12 separate plants to bloom unexpectedly in moments of strong emotion, which Griphook had described as a clear sign of an active core establishing its natural range. "You should be there," Harry said. "Front row of the gallery if you can get it." Neville relaxed in a way that suggested he'd been holding some tension in anticipation of being told no. "Right," he said. "Good." He put the plant pot on the table with a small thud. "Also, I brought you this." He pushed it toward Harry. It was a small, dark green plant with 3 leaves and a single small flower that had just opened, white, 5-petaled, unremarkable to look at. "It's a guardian's herb," Neville said. "In the old magical herbology, the preministry stuff, the kind my gran has books about but doesn't really rate. It was traditional for someone being witnessed at a significant occasion to be given one. The person in the gallery gives it to the person on the floor as, I looked it up, it's a fidelity gesture. It means I'm with you." Harry looked at the plant. "You plant it somewhere that matters," Neville said, with the slightly self-conscious energy of someone who has done extensive research on something sentimental and is aware this might be too much but has committed to it. "After. When it's done." Harry picked up the plant pot carefully. The soil was slightly damp and the flower smelled of something clean and faint, like morning air. "Thank you, Neville," he said. "Don't mention it," Neville said. "Then, actually mention it a little, it took me a week to find the right one and 3 nurseries." Hermione smiled, the warm one. Harry set the plant pot in the corner of the records room, next to the window where it would get the morning light, and went back to his notes, and felt something settle in his chest that was solid and real and had nothing to do with politics. Tuesday arrived gray and cold for late September, the kind of morning that felt like the world getting serious. Harry was at the ministry by 8:30, which was 90 minutes before the sitting, and he spent the first hour in the Gringotts liaison office on the ministry's 4th floor going through the confirmation motion language with Ragnarok one final time and confirming that all filings were in order and the imperial seal documentation was physically present and accounted for. At 9:45, he walked to the lift with Ragnarok and descended to the chamber level. The corridor outside the chamber was already populated. Several Wisengamot members were clustered in conversation near the entrance. Harry recognized Bagnall's upright posture, Burke's slow deliberate movement, Rosier's careful watchfulness. He saw Augusta at the far end of the corridor, in full Wisengamot robes, speaking to Griselda Marchbanks with the contained intensity of a final briefing. And he saw Dumbledore. The headmaster was standing slightly apart from the main cluster, speaking quietly to no one, reading a piece of parchment that might have been the agenda or might have been something else entirely. He looked up when Harry came in, and their eyes met across the corridor, and what passed between them was not warmth and not hostility but something in the specific register of 2 people who had sat in a room together and said true things and were now in the same space again with all of that between them, acknowledged and unresolved and present. Dumbledore inclined his head slightly. Harry returned it. That was enough. Augusta appeared at his shoulder. "Ready?" she said. "Yes," Harry said. The motion to move the imperial hearing to first is prepared. Marchbanks will second it. We have 17 confirmable votes for the motion itself, which is sufficient. She looked at him with the sharp-eyed assessment she always wore. When you're on the floor, stand in the center. Don't move toward the sides. The center of the floor is traditional for claimants and moving away from it reads as deference or uncertainty. Don't speak before you're called upon, but when you are called upon, speak immediately and clearly. She paused. You know all of this. I know all of this, Harry agreed. I'm saying it anyway, she said, which was, for Augusta Longbottom, the equivalent of saying good luck. The doors to the chamber opened at 10 o'clock. The Wisingamot filed in with the particular ordered progression of an institution that had its own internal hierarchy of precedence even for something as basic as entering a room. Harry stood in the corridor with Ragnock and waited, as was correct for a claimant. You did not file in with the members, you were brought to the floor once the chamber was convened. He could hear the chamber filling through the open doors. The shuffling and settling of 50 people finding their seats. A murmur of conversation that gradually lowered to the expectant quiet of people waiting for proceedings to begin. He heard the Chief Warlock's traditional opening invocation, Dumbledore's voice, formal and precise, stripped of its usual warmth by the ritual register, and the response from the chamber. And then the door warden appeared at the corridor entrance. Mr. Potter, he said. The chamber is ready for you. Harry looked at Ragnock. The assessments are all in order, Ragnock said. The documentation is present. The legal foundation is complete. He paused, and then added, in the tone of someone departing from official business to say something personal, you are ready. I know, Harry said. Thank you. For everything. Thank me after, Ragnock said. Go. Harry walked through the doors. The first thing he registered was the light, the chamber torches all burning steadily, the magical flames casting an even, warm illumination that left no shadows and gave every seat its full clarity. The second thing was the silence, which was not the silence of an empty room but the silence of 50 people all stopping conversation simultaneously, which was a different and more charged thing entirely. He walked to the center of the floor. He was aware of the stairs, all of them, around a full semicircle, 50 pairs of eyes of varying degrees of hostility and curiosity and studied neutrality and one or two that were clearly trying to look unimpressed and not quite managing it. He was aware of Neville in the public gallery above and to his right, front row as promised, sitting very straight with his hands on his knees. He was aware of the 12 blank imperial seats above and behind him, 2 tiers up, waiting. He stood in the exact center of the floor and looked at Dumbledore in the Chief Warlock's chair. He did not look away. He did not look down. He did not make himself smaller. Before we proceed to the listed agenda, Augusta Longbottom's voice rang out from the right tier. Before Dumbledore had completed his opening remarks, I move that we amend the order of business to hear the Imperial confirmation as the first item of the day. She stood. The claimant is present. The documentation is filed and verified. Deferring the hearing serves no procedural purpose and may constitute an unnecessary impediment to a lawful process. Seconded, Griselda Marchbanks said, from the upper tier, without standing up, with the energy of someone who had been waiting to say a single word all morning. Dumbledore looked at the motion without readable expression. The motion to amend the agenda is before the chamber, he said. Members in favor? 22 hands went up. Not 17. 22. Harry noted this without showing his reaction. 5 members had moved that hadn't been confirmed. Either Augusta's overnight work had been more effective than reported, or some of Dumbledore's own bloc had made an independent decision, or the straightforward logic of the motion had simply convinced people on the spot. He filed the number and moved on. The motion carries, Dumbledore said. The Imperial confirmation hearing will proceed as first business. His voice remained entirely level. Mr. Potter. As claimant under the Compact of 832, please present your case to the chamber. Harry had prepared remarks. He had written them with Hermione, refined them with Ragnock, tested them in the empty chamber, and knew them well enough to have discarded them. He didn't use the prepared remarks. "My name is Harry James Potter," he said. His voice went out into the chamber clearly, without effort, the acoustics doing their work. "I am the confirmed heir of the houses Potter, Peveril, and Emerys, the last of these being the imperial line that established this compact and this chamber. The Gringotts assessment that confirmed these facts was conducted under the oversight of Senior Assessor Ragnarok, is certified by Gringotts Bank as an institution of independent standing, and is in your files." He paused. "I'm not going to spend time arguing the legal substance of the claim, because it's been argued in the documentation. What I'd like to say instead is what I think this is for." The chamber was completely still. "This institution has been operating on provisional authority for 183 years, Harry said. In that time, it has done a great deal of good and a significant amount of harm. People have been imprisoned without trial. Laws have been passed that denied rights to beings with full magical capacity. Inquiries have been delayed or buried or never opened. Some of this happened because of malice. Most of it happened because the people making the decisions believed they were right, and because there was nothing with sufficient independent authority to tell them when they weren't." He looked around the chamber, not quickly, not nervously, but taking his time, meeting eyes as he went. The Imperial Compact was not written to give one person absolute power over everyone else. It was written to give the institution something it currently lacks, a check. Something with enough legal standing to say, not this, not like this, not to these people, and have it mean something. He let that sit for a moment. "I'm 8 years old," he said, and there was a slight shift in the chamber, tension that had been waiting for something, not sure what. "People have said this to me approximately 40 times in the past month as though it's a disqualification. I don't think it is. I think what I am is someone who was deliberately kept from knowing what I was and what I was owed, by people who believed that managing me was the same thing as protecting me." He kept his voice even, not accusatory, just clear. "And I think that's actually the most honest argument for why the compact needs to be confirmed. Because what happened to me is what happens when you have institutions without accountability. Even the people running them, even the ones with the best intentions, eventually make decisions that they would make differently if there was something they had to answer to." He reached into his jacket and removed the assessment parchment. He held it up, not theatrically, just visibly, so the chamber could see the Gringotts seal and the Imperial confirmation stamp at the top. "This is what the stone found," he said. "My lineage, my claim, and the record of what was done to me. It's in your files. I'm not asking you to confirm me out of sympathy for what's in this parchment. I'm asking you to confirm the compact because the law says you should and because I think you know, in the part of yourselves that has been watching this institution for years, that something is missing and this is what it is." He folded the parchment and put it back. "That's all I have." The silence in the chamber lasted 3 full seconds. Then Edmund Rosier said, from his seat, "I call for the vote." "Seconded," said Burke, and managed to make the single word sound like a complete sentence. Dumbledore looked at the chamber. His expression was still level, still professional, still the chief warlock conducting proceedings. But something behind his eyes was doing something else. Harry could see it from the floor, and he thought it might be the expression of a man who was listening to an argument he had expected to disagree with and finding he couldn't. "The motion for imperial confirmation under the Compact of 832 is before the chamber," Dumbledore said. "Members will cast their votes. In favor?" The hands went up. Harry counted. He had been counting in his head since the morning, mapping the confirmed votes against the chamber layout, running scenarios. He had his number, 28, possibly 30 if everything went right. He counted 36 hands. 36 out of 50. A supermajority. Against? Dumbledore said. 9 hands. Fudge's most committed block members, the ones who decided that staying close to their minister was worth more than being on the right side of history. 9 people out of 50. Abstentions? 5. Including Dumbledore himself, whose hand remained down. The chamber waited. The confirmation carries, Dumbledore said, by 36 votes in favor, 9 against, 5 abstentions. He paused, and in the pause something happened that Harry did not expect. Dumbledore looked down at the parchment on his desk, then up at the chamber, and then, with the precision of someone doing a thing they have decided on and are not going to be uncertain about, he said, "The Imperial Compact of 832 is hereby confirmed active. Harry James Potter is recognized by this chamber as Emperor of Magical Britain, with all powers, responsibilities, and authorities established under the compact and its codicils. So recorded." The words hit the chamber like a stone dropping into still water, the ripple going out in all directions, some faces going still, some nodding, one or two showing the bright sharp expression of people who understood they were in a moment they would be telling people about. And then, from the 12 imperial seats above and behind Harry, something happened that no amount of legal preparation had covered. The seats lit up. Not suddenly, gradually, a warm gold light rising through the stone of the seats themselves, the same quality as the stone in the assessment room but larger, more sustained. The imperial crest above each seat shimmered and resolved, the scales and sword becoming sharp and clear after 183 years of faded stone. The light rose and steadied and sat there, filling that section of the chamber with a warmth that was entirely distinct from the torch flames. The chamber was absolutely silent. Harry stood on the floor and looked up at the 12 glowing seats. He felt something he could not have described precisely if he tried, not power, not triumph, not the thing people seem to expect him to feel in a moment like this. Something quieter and more complicated. The feeling of something very old recognizing something it had been waiting for. The feeling, for the first time in his entire life, of being entirely in the right place. He turned back to the chamber. "Thank you," he said. It came out simply, without ceremony, which felt right. From the public gallery, Neville Longbottom stood up. It was not a planned gesture, it was just Neville being Neville, unable to sit still when something moved him. He stood and for a moment was the only person in the room who wasn't seated, and then Augusta stood up from her Wisengamot seat, because she was Augusta and she had decided something, and then Marchbanks, and then Burke, and then Rosier, and then the cascade moved through the chamber and the public gallery both, not every person but enough, and the ones who didn't stand sat very still and said nothing, which was its own kind of answer. Harry stood in the center of the floor and did not perform anything. He just let it be what it was. The chamber broke for a recess after the confirmation, procedurally necessary before the remaining 2 agenda items could be addressed, and Harry walked into the corridor outside and found it substantially different from the corridor he'd left 90 minutes ago. 3 Wisengamot members he'd never met approached him in the first 2 minutes, not with the agenda-driven manner of people who wanted something, but with the slightly dazed energy of people who had just watched something happen and needed to be close to it for a moment. He was polite. He was present. He did not make any grand promises to anyone, because Hermione had told him, specifically and in writing, not to make any grand promises in the immediate aftermath of a significant vote, and she was right, because the aftermath of significant votes was exactly when people tried to get commitments that the ordinary run of conversation wouldn't produce. Fudge found him in the corridor 15 minutes into the recess. He came without his officials this time, which was either a sign of trust or a sign that he'd decided the officials were a liability. His pleasant face had been replaced by something more honest, which Harry actually preferred. "That was not what I expected," Fudge said. "What did you expect?" Harry asked. "A closer vote. More disruption. Some kind of dramatic intervention." He looked at Harry with something that might have been rueful. "I had contingency plans." "I know," Harry said. "I had responses to all of them." Fudge was quiet for a moment. "I'm not your enemy," he said. "I want you to know that. I've been cautious, because caution is what I do, and because your claim changes the landscape of every decision I make. But I'm not your enemy." "I know that too," Harry said. "You're someone who makes decisions based on what's safe for you. That's a problem when it conflicts with what's right, but it's not the same as malice." He paused. Cooperate with the Black Review. Genuinely cooperate, access to records, no obstruction, full transparency. Do that and it will be visible and it will matter. And if I do? Fudge asked, which was essentially asking what he'd get for it. If you do, the ministry has a functioning relationship with the imperial office rather than a contested one, Harry said. Which is considerably better for the ministry's long-term stability than the alternative. Fudge thought about this in the rapid, practical way he thought about things, not deep, but fast. All right, he said. I'll sign the cooperation order today. Good, Harry said, and meant it simply. He found Hermione in the anteroom where she'd been waiting with the monitoring equipment, surrounded by notes and looking up at him with the expression she had when she was managing the size of her reaction. He sat down across from her. 36, she said. I know. I had 29 as a high estimate. I know that too. She looked at him. How do you feel? He thought about it. Like the first part is finished, he said. And the next part is going to be harder. Yes, she said. It is. She closed her notebook. But we're ready for it. We are, he agreed. From the chamber, through the stone walls, the muffled sound of the sitting resuming, business continuing, the institution working, 50 people and all their complications going on with the thing that needed going on with. Harry let it go on without him for another 5 minutes. He sat with his best friend in a grey stone room beneath London and felt the weight of what he'd taken on, not as burden, not as fear, but as the weight of something real, something that mattered, something that was his in the way that things are yours when you chose them rather than having them assigned. Then he stood up, straightened his jacket, and went back in. Chapter 6, What Emperors Are Made of. The trial of Sirius Black was set for a Thursday. It had taken 3 weeks from the confirmation vote for the property tribunal to complete its preliminary review, another week for the Wisingamat to accept the tribunal's referral, and 2 more days of procedural argument about venue. The ministry wanted a closed hearing, Harry wanted an open one, and the imperial writ settled the question in approximately 4 minutes when Ragnarok filed it on Monday morning. Open hearing. Full public record. No sealed testimony without cause. Harry had spent the 6 weeks since the confirmation vote in the specific kind of work that didn't look dramatic from the outside but was the thing everything else rested on, meeting after meeting, document after document, the slow careful labor of building something durable rather than something spectacular. He had formally activated the 12 imperial seats, which required a separate compact ceremony in the Gringotts assessment room that lasted 2 hours and left him slightly drained and entirely certain, in the way that things felt certain when your blood and the magic agreed on them. He had made his first imperial ruling, a small one deliberately, a clarification of beast classification law that affected a community of magical creatures in Cornwall who had been petitioning the ministry unsuccessfully for 11 years. The ruling took 15 minutes to write and 40 minutes to formally register, and it changed nothing grand, and it changed everything for the people it affected. Hermione had cried a little when she read it, which she blamed entirely on having been up since 4 in the morning finishing a brief on the Black case, and Harry had accepted this explanation because he understood that some things needed a plausible reason. He had also, in those 6 weeks, sat with Griphook for 4 more memory charm removals. Session 6 had been the hardest, the oldest layers, the ones cast closest to the beginning, the ones that held the things Dumbledore had decided a 20-month-old child was better off not knowing. What came back was not coherent memory exactly but something more fundamental, the emotional truth of his early life before it had been rearranged. The warmth and security of a home where he was wanted completely and without condition. The sound of his father's voice reading out loud. The feeling of his mother's specific magic, which was different from anyone else's in the way that voices were different, recognizable in a register below language. He had sat on the floor of Griphook's room for a long time after that one. He had not processed it later. He had processed it then, in the room, which Griphook had the professional discretion to leave him to in silence. What came out of the processing was not resolution. He understood now that some things didn't resolve, they just became part of the structure, but something more like integration. The grief was real and it was his, and he stopped putting it in a drawer marked later and let it be present, and found that it was possible to carry it and still work, which was not something he'd been certain about. He wrote to Hermione about it. Not all of it, but enough. She wrote back something that was mostly practical and ended with a single sentence: "You're allowed to miss them. That doesn't make you weak, it makes you someone who loved people and lost them. Those are not the same thing." He kept that letter in the pillowcase with the stone and the photograph. The morning of the trial he arrived at the ministry at 7, 2 hours before the public gallery opened and 3 before the hearing was scheduled to begin. He went to the Gringotts liaison office first, confirmed the documentation package was complete, reviewed the Pettigrew evidence summary with Ragnarok one final time, and then went down to the courtroom level, a different corridor from the Weisengamot chamber, older still, the walls closer together and the torches more widely spaced. He had never been in courtroom 10 before. He stood in the entrance for a moment and absorbed it, the heavy stone chair in the center with its iron chains currently lying dormant at its sides, the raised prosecution bench, the tiered seating for the Weisengamot members who were hearing the case. It was smaller than the main chamber and the smallness made it more oppressive, the stone more present, the weight of what happened in rooms like this landing differently. He thought about Sirius Black sitting in a room like this. Then he thought about Sirius Black not sitting in a room like this, because there had been no room like this, there had been just Azkaban without the in-between. He went back upstairs and ate breakfast in the ministry canteen because the alternative was standing in the corridor and letting the accumulated weight of everything get ahead of him, and he had learned, over the past 2 months, that practical actions were the best management tool he had for that particular problem. Hermione arrived at 8:30, followed by Neville, who had come with Augusta, who was in full Weisengamot robes and had her vulture hat on, which Harry had come to understand was her battle dress. Neville had dirt on his left thumb again from whatever he'd been doing before he left and hadn't noticed, and he had the contained energy of someone who had been waiting for this specific day and was running on the particular anticipation that comes from having cared about something for a long time and being close to the thing you hoped for. They sat in the ministry canteen and drank tea and did not say very much, which was the right thing. There wasn't much to say. The work was done. The evidence was filed. What happened now was going to happen, and the shape of it would be determined by how solid the work had been. Harry looked around the table, Hermione with her notebook closed for once, Neville with his thumb and his contained energy, Augusta straight-backed and present, Ragnarok who had arrived at 8:45 with the expression of someone who had been doing this for a long time and still cared about the outcome. He thought about what Hermione had said in the bookshop, what felt like a lifetime ago but had been 9 weeks. I think that the kind of large complicated thing you seem to be planning requires not just research support, but someone who will tell you when you're wrong. He thought about what Neville had said in the assessment room. I want in. He thought about Augusta's 2 Weisengamot seats given without calculation and Burke's story about his wife and Bagnall's choice not to repeat her old cowardice. He thought about a man in Azkaban who didn't know any of this was coming. Right, he said. Let's go. Courtroom 10 at 10 o'clock was full in the specific way that significant events filled spaces, not just the chairs occupied but the air different, charged with the attention of people who understood they were present for something that was going to matter. The prosecution bench had 2 ministry lawyers and a senior orar whose expression suggested he was professionally unhappy about the proceedings. The Weisengamot hearing panel was 7 members, selected by lot, which Harry had insisted on, Augusta was on it, and Tiberius Ogden, and 5 others he had no specific relationship with, which was the point. The chair in the center of the room was empty. Sirius Black was brought in at 10:15. Harry had seen photographs in the Gringotts file, a young man, early 20s, dark-haired and bright-eyed, the kind of face that looked like it had been designed for laughing. What walked in now was not that. 11 years in Azkaban did specific things to people. The Dementors took the happy memories first, the warmth and the ease and the things that made life feel worth the effort, and what was left after 11 years was hollowed in a particular way, the bones of the person still there but the substance worn thin. Sirius Black was tall, still, and the black hair was long and tangled and the eyes were gray and the face was gaunt and the walk was careful in the manner of someone who had learned not to expect their surroundings to remain stable. But the eyes. The eyes were still there, in the specific sense that mattered, not the brightness from the photographs, not yet, but something underneath the hollowness that was not gone, just buried under 11 years of cold and dark and the particular cruelty of having your own mind emptied out by creatures that fed on what made you human. Something that looked like a person who was still, technically, fighting. The chains on the chair moved toward him when he sat, reflexive, responding to the magic of the room, and Harry, from his position in the gallery directly above the floor, said quietly to the room, "The chains aren't necessary." The chains stopped. The Weisengamot panel looked up at the gallery. The prosecuting lawyers looked at each other. The senior orer looked at the floor with the expression of a man who was going to be professionally unhappy about this all day. Sirius Black looked up at the gallery. He found Harry almost immediately, which said something about either the specific quality of his attention or the specific quality of Harry's, and for a moment he just looked, and Harry looked back, and the moment was too complicated for the room it was in, but the room held it anyway. Sirius's mouth opened slightly. Closed. Something moved across his face that was not a recognizable expression so much as the ghost of several at once. Harry gave him a small nod. "I know. I'm here. It's going to be all right." Whether Sirius read all of that into a single nod Harry couldn't be certain. But something changed in his posture, slight, almost imperceptible, the easing of something that had been held very tight for a very long time. The hearing began. The prosecution's case was presented by a ministry lawyer named Avery who had the slightly overwrought confidence of someone who had prepared extensively for a case he'd expected to win easily and was recalibrating in real time. He presented the original eyewitness accounts, 4 muggles and 2 wizards who had reported seeing Sirius Black laughing at a crater in a street in London, with bodies around him and Peter Pettigrew's severed finger found at the scene. He had just finished presenting the witness statements when Tiberius Ogden, from the panel, said, "The Gringotts evidence file. I'd like that presented to the panel before we continue." Avery blinked. "The prosecution hasn't concluded, the panel requests the Gringotts evidence file," Ogden said, with the absolute calm of someone who had been in this room enough times to know that what the panel requested, the panel received. Mr. Ragnarok. Ragnarok, from his position in the court as Gringotts' representative, stood and presented the file methodically and without drama, because methodical and without drama was the most devastating mode for this particular evidence. The vault access records, Paris, showing an attempt under a name registered to a deceased person. The London attempt, 3 months ago. The Animagus non-registration record. The Pettigrew vault, still active, still accruing interest on deposits that a dead man couldn't have made. The panel read in silence. "The evidence suggests," Augusta said, from her seat on the panel, and her voice was the voice she used when she had already reached a verdict and was working backward through the formality of reaching it aloud, "that Peter Pettigrew may not be deceased." "May not be," Avery said. "This is circumstantial, it's a vault access attempt," Ogden said. "At a bank that does not make errors of that kind." The prosecution's entire case, said a panel member Harry didn't know, a witch named Hopkirk, rests on the assumption that Pettigrew is dead and that Black killed him. If Pettigrew is alive, the case dissolves. Avery looked at his notes with the expression of someone whose notes were no longer helping. Harry, from the gallery, was watching Sirius. Sirius was watching the proceedings with the careful, slightly disbelieving attention of someone who had spent 11 years in a place where nothing good happened and was having difficulty calibrating to the current evidence that good things could. He was leaning slightly forward. His hands, on the arms of the chair, were very still. The panel conferred for 20 minutes in the side chamber. The court waited. When they came back, Augusta spoke the finding because she was the senior member and had the seniority to deliver it directly rather than by formal written statement. "This panel finds insufficient evidence to support the original charges against Sirius Orion Black," she said, "given the substantial reasonable doubt introduced by the Gringotts evidence regarding the presumed death of Peter Pettigrew. The panel further finds that the original imprisonment was procedurally defective, having been ordered without trial, and was therefore unlawful from its inception." She paused, and in the pause put something else, not legal language, something older and plainer. Sirius Black is innocent until the prosecution can establish otherwise, which on the current evidence it cannot. He is to be released immediately and his vault unseized and his property rights restored with immediate effect. The room was very quiet. Sirius Black looked at the panel, then at the gallery, then at the chains on the chair arms that had never closed. He stood up. He stood up slowly, like someone testing whether the ground was going to hold, and it held, and he stood there for a moment in the middle of courtroom 10 looking like a man trying to remember what it felt like to stand up without chains and finding that the memory, even after 11 years, was still there. Harry stood up from the gallery. Their eyes met again. "Hello," Harry said. He had planned something more substantial and found, at the moment, that this was the only word he had. Sirius Black's face did something that was not quite a smile because it was too full for that, too many things trying to come through a single expression. His voice, when it came, was rougher than it had probably once been, worn down by 11 years of minimal use, but it was his voice, recognizably and entirely. "You look," he said, "exactly like your father." "I know," Harry said. "I've got my mother's eyes." Sirius made a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and something that wasn't a laugh at all. "Yes," he said. "You do." The courtroom proceedings finished by noon, which left the afternoon for the part that nobody had written procedures for. Gringotts had made available a private suite of rooms, the practical logic being that Sirius Black had a vault and a restored estate and technically a townhouse at Grimmauld Place, none of which was immediately habitable, and someone had to be somewhere while the practical complications of going from Azkaban to freedom were worked out. Sirius sat in a chair in the Gringotts suite with a cup of tea that he kept forgetting to drink, and Harry sat across from him, and Hermione and Neville were in the outer room giving them space that Harry appreciated and had not asked for, which was one of the things he'd come to value about both of them. The suite was quiet. Through the high windows the London afternoon was doing ordinary London things, traffic, pigeons, the indifferent city. "They told me you were coming," Sirius said. "The Gringotts official who came to Azkaban with the hearing notice. She said the Emperor has filed for your review." He paused. "I thought I was losing my mind. Another 11 years and I'd have lost it completely, but I thought this was the beginning of the last bit." He looked at his tea. "And then she showed me the imperial seal on the document and," he stopped. "I knew your grandfather, a little. He was before my time in the Wisengamot but he was spoken of. And I knew your great-grandmother's correspondence with your mother, which your mother showed me once." He shook his head slightly. "Lily knew," he said. "Not the full extent of it, not all the details, but she had a sense of it. She told me once that Harry was going to be remarkable. Not in the way people say that about children they love. In the way she said things when she actually meant them." Harry looked at him. "Tell me about them," he said. "When you're ready. I have the Gringotts files and the parchments and the legal records. But tell me about them the way you knew them." Sirius was quiet for a moment. "James was the most irritating person I have ever loved," he said, and the past tense hit the room and sat in it honestly, without being softened. "He was brilliant and he knew it and he made absolutely sure everyone else knew it too, right up until the moment he didn't, when it mattered, when he grew up." He looked at the window. "He was funny. Actually funny, not performed funny. And he loved your mother like he'd invented the concept." He paused. She was the most genuinely good person I've ever known, and that sounds like a eulogy platitude but I mean it differently. Not good the way people are good when it's easy. Good the way people are good when it costs them something, when they're tired, when they're afraid." Harry sat with this. "She would have known exactly what to do with you," Sirius said quietly. "She'd have read every law text in Britain and then made you eat something and asked you how you felt about it." He looked at Harry properly for the first time, the full, direct look of someone who had been building up to it. "How are you doing?" "Actually. Processing a lot," Harry said. "Doing it anyway." Yes. That's very much a Potter thing. A small pause. And a black thing, for that matter, though we tended to process through shouting rather than strategy. He looked at his hands, which had steadied somewhat over the course of the last hour. I heard some of what you said in the Wiesengemot. The confirmation hearing. Griselda Marchbanks apparently wrote down the whole speech and circulated it because she thought it was worth circulating. He paused. Your father would have been, he stopped. Tried again. It would have made him very proud. Both of them. Harry looked at the floor for a moment. He did not process it later. He was present with it, in the room, the way he'd learned to be. It hurt the way it was supposed to hurt, clean and real and proportionate to what it meant, and it wasn't unbearable, it was just grief, and grief was the other side of love, and he was learning not to be afraid of it. I want you to come back, Harry said. When you're ready. There's a lot still to do and I could use, I'd like you to be there for it. I've been in Azkaban for 11 years, Sirius said. I'm going to need about a week to adjust to things like, he looked at the tea, hot beverages and sunlight and not having my soul eaten. After that, I'm at your disposal. Take whatever time you need, Harry said. Also, Sirius said, and something shifted in his voice, something that was the first genuine version of the brightness Harry had seen traces of in the old photographs, not the full thing yet but the beginning of it, like a fire just catching, the Grimmauld Place townhouse is a disaster. I can feel it from here. My mother's portrait alone is going to require significant strategic planning. We'll deal with it, Harry said. The we in that sentence, Sirius said, looking at him with the assessing expression of a godfather recalibrating to a reality rather than an expectation, is doing quite a lot of work. Yes, Harry said. It is. The week after the trial was the week everything compounded. The Daily Prophet ran Sirius Black's release on the front page for 3 consecutive days, the first day straightforwardly, the second day with a retrospective on the original imprisonment that read like the paper discovering, slightly embarrassed, that it had never questioned the story, and the third day with an editorial that Harry found genuinely interesting because it arrived at the conclusion that the ministry's willingness to imprison without trial was a structural problem rather than an individual failure, which was the argument he'd made in the confirmation hearing in which it was useful to have a publication echoing. Fudge's cooperation order on the Black Review became public record, which Fudge was clearly hoping would be received as statesmanlike and which was received as more or less adequate, which for Fudge was probably the best he'd realistically expected. Harry made a brief public statement through Gringotts thanking the minister's office for their cooperation, which he meant in the specific, narrow, accurate sense, and he noted Fudge's relief at it from a distance and understood that relief was a currency he could use carefully. The grand magical larceny complaint against Dumbledore remained filed and remained pending. It was not moving quickly, partly because the Wiesengemot body responsible for reviewing it contained several of Dumbledore's allies and partly because the subject of the complaint was the most publicly beloved wizard in Britain, which made even people who believed the complaint was warranted cautious about the form the proceedings took. Harry was not in a hurry about it. He let it sit where it was, visible, on record, not going away. The purpose it was currently serving was not conviction, if it came, would come through the proper process when it came, but the public fact of it, which changed the dynamic around Dumbledore in ways that were difficult to quantify but real. People who had previously deferred to him automatically were now deferring slightly less automatically. His comments in the Wiesengemot carried slightly less unquestioned weight. The shift was subtle and it was significant. He had spoken to Dumbledore once more in the 6 weeks since the confirmation vote, a brief conversation in the corridor outside the Wiesengemot chamber after a routine sitting. It had been civil and direct and had contained no warmth and no hostility and had covered 3 specific points of business in 5 minutes. At the end Dumbledore had said, quietly, the prophecy. I think it's time you knew. Not yet, Harry had said. But soon. I'll come to you when I'm ready. Dumbledore had looked at him with that expression he had sometimes, the one that was a very old, very intelligent man encountering the ongoing reality that he was no longer the one determining the timeline of things, and said, of course. When you're ready. Harry was not ready yet. He would be, and soon, because understanding the nature of the threat was necessary for dealing with it, and Voldemort was not gone in any final sense. He knew that, had known it from the first week in a wordless, bone-deep way, the way you knew things that were true in the body rather than the mind. But the sequence mattered. There were foundations still to pour before that particular storm arrived, and he was going to pour them correctly before he turned to face it. He had time. Not infinite time, but enough. 3 weeks after the trial, on a Saturday morning, Harry went back to the empty assessment room at Gringotts alone. Griphook was done. Session 8, 2 days ago, had been the last, the final memory charm removed, the last layer lifted, the last key turning. He had spent the 2 days since integrating the last wave of returned memory and finding, on the other side of it, something he hadn't been sure would be there. He felt complete. Not in the sense of finished. He was 8 years old, he had an enormous amount ahead of him and he knew it and was not afraid of it. But complete in the sense of unobstructed. The person he was had always been this person, had been this person even under 52 layers of deliberate forgetting, but now the person he was and the person he remembered being and the person he was becoming were all pointing in the same direction without interference. He sat in the assessment room's chair and put his hand flat on the stone. He hadn't asked Griphook or Ragnarok. He'd just come in and sat down and done it, because the stone was a piece of truth and truth was something he had a particular relationship with and he wanted to sit with it for a moment. The stone lit up gold. He felt it, the warmth, the reading quality, the deep sense of being known. He stayed with it for several minutes without asking anything of it, just letting it do what it did, and what it confirmed back to him was the thing he already knew, this was his. All of it. The lineage and the compact and the responsibility and the weight and the possibility. His, not assigned, not managed, not arranged by someone else's certainty about what he should be. Chosen. In the specific sense that things were yours when you chose them fully, with complete understanding of what they cost. He took his hand off the stone and sat in the quiet room. Through the door he could hear the bank, the clink of coins, the scratch of quills, the vast ordinary machinery of an institution operating. Through some more distant wall he could feel the city, London in the late morning, alive and indifferent and enormous and full. He thought about his parents, briefly and clearly, the way he'd been practicing, not pushing it away, not drowning in it, just holding it. His mother's magic. His father's laugh that was in Sirius's face sometimes when something surprised him into joy. The house in Godric's Hollow that he would visit, when he was ready, which was not yet. He thought about Hermione, who was currently in the reading room at the back of Flourish and Blots, which was where she went on Saturday mornings, and who had written him 6 pages of notes this week on the post-war Death Eater trial inquiry that was now formally open and which she had decided she was personally invested in, which meant she was going to be formidable on the subject. He thought about Neville, who had sent him an owl 2 days ago with a cutting from one of the 12 plants that had been blooming spontaneously and a note that said, "Thought you should have this one too. It's a different kind. I think it suits you better. It needs direct light and honesty and it's very hard to kill." He thought about Ragnarok, who had had an appointment with the minister's office last week that had ended with 3 additional provisions of the Gringotts Wizard Accords being formally recognized, which was not everything but was the beginning of everything, and which Ragnarok had reported in the tone of someone trying to maintain professional composure and not entirely succeeding. He thought about Sirius, who had spent the first week at Grimmauld Place in a state that Harry had watched carefully from a respectful distance and characterized as gradual reintegration, relearning the simple mechanics of a life not defined by walls and cold and the daily theft of everything that made you yourself. Sirius had owed him 3 times in that week. The first 2 owls were practical. The third was a long letter that was partly about James and partly about Lily and partly about a specific afternoon when the 3 of them, Sirius and James and Harry's then heavily pregnant mother, had spent an afternoon at the Godric's Hollow cottage arguing about baby names, and which had ended with all 3 of them agreeing that Harry was perfect because it was simple and James's grandfather had been Henry and Lily liked the diminutive and Sirius had said it sounded like someone who would be all right, and they had all laughed. Harry had read that letter 3 times. He stood up from the assessment room chair. The stone went dark behind him, the gold fading to ordinary gray as he moved away. He straightened his jacket. He had a full afternoon ahead, a meeting with the solicitors drafting the post-war inquiry terms, a session with Hermione on the beast classification reform that was his second imperial ruling and which he wanted to get right, and Sirius was coming to Gringotts at 5 with a box of photographs he'd found at Grimmauld Place that he'd said, in an owl that morning, Harry should probably see. He walked out of the assessment room and into the bank corridor and thought about the year behind him and the years ahead of him, and he felt, with a clarity that had nothing uncertain in it, that he knew what he was doing and why and that the foundation was solid. He was not finished. He was begun. Hermione was waiting for him in the Gringotts entrance hall with a stack of books and her notebook and the expression she had when she'd found something in the middle of her own research that had started off as background and turned into the most interesting thing in the source material. "The beast classification reform," she said, before he'd reached her. "I was going through the pre-ministry classification systems and the original definitions of being, beast, and spirit as the goblins used them before the ministry imposed its own framework, and there's a compelling case that the entire ministry system was built on a category error to begin with. The original Goblin framework had 37 distinct classifications covering rights, responsibilities, and magical capacity, and the ministry collapsed all of that into 3, which is why the current law is such a mess." "Show me," Harry said. She opened the top book and was already pointing at the relevant passage as they walked, talking quickly and precisely about category theory and magical rights and the history of deliberate institutional simplification, and Harry kept up without difficulty and asked 3 questions in the first corridor that sent her back to her notes with that particular energy she had when a question opened a new direction. They were deep in the argument by the time they reached the records room, and Ragnarok appeared at the door approximately 90 seconds after they sat down, drawn by some goblin equivalent of radar for when Harry was in the building and working, and added 2 historical precedents from memory that Hermione immediately wrote down, and the afternoon opened up into the kind of work that was genuinely good work, the kind where the problem was interesting and the people were the right people and the thing you were building was worth building. At 5 o'clock Sirius arrived. He looked better than he had at the trial, not healed, that was going to take considerably longer than 3 weeks, but more present, more inhabiting himself. He had cut his hair, or had Augusta do it, which she had apparently insisted on with characteristic briskness. He was wearing robes that were a bit too large and clearly borrowed from somewhere in the Grimmauld Place wardrobes that had belonged to someone taller, but he was wearing them with the unconscious ease of a man who had once been comfortable in his own life and was finding his way back to that. He set a wooden box on the table without ceremony. "Photographs," he said. From the flat above the Potter's cottage, mostly, James had a terrible habit of never putting photographs in albums, just keeping them in boxes, which drove Lily absolutely mad. "There are also some from Hogwarts." He paused. I don't want to just hand them over. I thought I'd tell you who everyone is." Harry looked at the box. He looked at Sirius. He looked at Hermione and Neville, who had arrived at 4:30 with his plant and his notebook and a slightly muddy boot that he'd apologized for, and both of whom were making the particular slight withdrawal of people who understood this was a specific kind of moment. "Stay," Harry said to them. "Please." He looked at Sirius. "They know everything. They're part of this." Sirius looked at Hermione and Neville with the assessing expression that Harry was beginning to recognize as his default mode when encountering new people, quick, direct, looking for the thing underneath the surface presentation. Whatever he found in both of them seemed to satisfy something, because the expression shifted into something simpler. "Right," he said, and sat down and opened the box. "This is going to take a while." He pulled out the first photograph. It was James and Lily, probably early 20s, standing in front of the Godric's Hollow cottage in summer. James had his arm around Lily's shoulder and was saying something that was clearly ridiculous, because Lily was trying and failing not to laugh with the specific effort of someone who didn't want to encourage him and couldn't help it. The photograph James kept glancing at the camera and then back at Lily with an expression so unguarded and specific that it needed no translation. Harry looked at it for a long time. "Saturday afternoon, early July," Sirius said. "I took this." James had just said something, I cannot tell you what because it was appalling, but Lily laughed for about 45 seconds straight and then threatened him with something involving transfiguration that I don't want to repeat. He paused, his voice doing the thing it did sometimes where it went slightly quieter without losing its steadiness. That was a good afternoon. Harry set the photograph gently on the table in front of him. He picked up the next one. They went through the whole box. 2 hours, maybe more, Sirius talking, Harry listening, Hermione occasionally asking a clarifying question that opened up the story further, Neville sitting with his plant in his lap and saying very little but present in the particular way that mattered. The Gringotts' rooms had gone to evening light, the torches warming the walls, and outside the high windows London was doing what it did at dusk, going amber and long-shadowed. There were photographs of Hogwarts and of the Marauders, 4 of them, Sirius and James and Lupin and Pettigrew, and the last one gave Harry a pause and a coldness that Sirius acknowledged with a brief, controlled expression. There were photographs of Harry himself as an infant, which he had not expected, which landed in him with a weight that was both terrible and something else, the specific grace of evidence that the warmth and the wanted completely had been real. There was a photograph of Lily holding a very small Harry near a window, and the light through the window was autumn light and her hair was doing something in it that the photograph remembered even in its magic-stilled way, and the expression on her face was the one from Sirius's letter, the simple, complete, uncomplicated certainty of someone who knew exactly what they had. Harry held that one for the longest time. Sirius let him. "She loved you completely," Sirius said, very quietly. "From before you were born. She'd read every book in Britain about magical children before you were 6 months in and she had opinions about all of them and she was not shy about expressing them." A pause. James said once that if he and Lily ever disagreed about something involving Harry, the correct strategy was to accept that Lily was right and work backward from there. He said this had a 100% success rate. Harry set the photograph carefully on the table, face up, next to the first one. "I'm going to see Godric's Hollow," he said. "Not yet. But soon." "I'll come with you," Sirius said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Harry said. "I know." He walked home through the evening city at 9 o'clock with the box of photographs under his arm and the Neville plant balanced carefully in his free hand, and the city was ordinary and enormous around him and he walked through it as himself, entirely, without the weight of the management or the forgetting or the careful smallness that had defined the first 8 years. He turned on to Privet Drive. The house was lit up, Dudley's room bright, the sitting room flickering with television. Ordinary. The most ordinary street in the world, which had been the point of it, and which was about to stop being the point of anything. He had spoken to Ragnarok about it that week. The legal position was clear: as emperor, his minority was a technical status rather than a practical one, and there were provisions in the compact for imperial residence that were nothing like Privet Drive. The actual transition was a question of timing and of not doing things reactively. He had been planning to move the conversation forward deliberately rather than being pushed into it. He looked at the house. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He was going to address it. Not tonight, but soon, in the same way he was going to address everything, in the right order, with solid ground underneath it, because that was how you built things that lasted. But he was going to address it, and he was not going to be afraid of it, and whoever needed to answer for what had happened in that house would answer for it properly. He went inside. He went to the cupboard. Not to sleep. Increasingly he didn't sleep there, having taken over Dudley's second bedroom by simple occupation without anyone in the house quite finding the moment to object, but to get the pillowcase, because the things in it needed to be somewhere better now. He opened it and took out the stone and the photograph and Hermione's first letter and Sirius's letter about the afternoon at Godric's Hollow, and he held them for a moment, the small collection of things that had been his and only his through all of it, the anchor points he'd maintained through 9 weeks of extraordinary acceleration and 52 layers of undoing. He put Neville's plant on the windowsill of the second bedroom where it would get the morning light. He put the stone on the desk. He put the photograph of his mother's red hair next to it, and beside it the photograph from the box, his mother at the window, the autumn light, the expression. He stood back and looked at all of it. Then he sat at the desk and opened his notebook and started drafting the terms of the post-war inquiry, because the evening was still young and there was still work to do, and the work was good work, the kind worth doing, the kind that mattered to people who deserved to have it matter. He wrote for 2 hours. When he was done he put down his pen and looked at the photographs one more time and felt, without reaching for it or manufacturing it, the thing he had been building toward since the morning in the cupboard when he'd read the Gringotts' letter by the strip of light under the door. Not safe, exactly. Not easy. Not finished. Found. He blew out the light and went to sleep. Outside, the street was quiet. The ministry owl that had watched the house for weeks was long gone. The city breathed around it in the dark, indifferent and enormous, full of everything that had not happened yet. In the morning there would be more work. There would always be more work, the inquiry and the beast classification reform and the Wisingamot and Sirius's slow return and the prophecy waiting for when he was ready and Voldemort still somewhere in the world's periphery and 1,000 threads still to pull into something coherent. There would be Hermione at 9 with her notebook and Neville with his plants and Ragnarok with his careful, transparent pragmatism and Augusta with her vulture hat and her absolute refusal to pretend that hard things were easier than they were. There would be all of it, all the weight and the work and the complexity of a world that had been badly run for a long time and needed something better. Harry Potter, Emperor of Magical Britain, 8 years old, 2 months out of a cupboard and in full possession of himself for the first time in his life, slept easily and without fear. The morning was going to be interesting. He was ready for it.